Chapter 34. Name: Huaisher. Age: 17. Wait a minute, is the Astronomy Society also recruiting male prostitutes? In the quiet office, the young man behind the desk scratched his chin and looked at the expressionless interrogator with a puzzled expression. I say, uncle, these days you've asked and investigated. At least I've eradicated a scourge for the Astronomy Society, right? Why do you treat me like a traitor? Routine investigation, please cooperate. For the umpteenth time, the interrogator said this sentence, and then asked again, can you describe to us the battle between you and the Red Gloves? I can't remember. Huaisher rolled his eyes. Probably the bald-caped Pepperfinger who passed by killed him with a slap. Really, I saw him fighting the Red Gloves as soon as I came in. Oh, the bald-caped Pepperfinger. Why is it different from what you said last time? I can't remember. Then, can you explain how you, as a newly promoted Splendid, killed the Third Order Red Gloves? According to our previous investigation, you seem to have always been a student specializing in music, and you haven't even been in a fight. Huaisher rolled his eyes. I'm born with superhuman strength. Then the next question. 2 hours later, the interrogator calmly sorted out the thick stack of records in his hand and got up to say goodbye as if it was a routine business. Then, thank you for your cooperation and thank you for your contribution to this world. After a formal handshake, he turned and left. Huaisher stood at the door with a dumbfounded expression. Finally done? Is there something wrong with the Astronomy Society? Sending such a person here and asking questions over and over these days. Ai Qing, who was reading, was not surprised. It's normal. There must be a detailed record of Green Sunday. They're all transcribers. Their duty is to record your words no matter what you say and then file them back. Is such a superficial record really useful? It's just a process. Ai Qing said calmly. If no one wants to cause trouble during the process, it's probably not a problem. Huaisher looked over. Causing trouble? Normal operation. Sit down. Ai Qing calmly sipped the coffee brought by the female attendant. Where there are people, there will be conflict. The position of the supervisor is so important, and there have always been too many wolves and too little meat. No one will be convinced that a lame person like me, who is only a few months away from 20 years old, has taken the position. If I can free up a spot by doing something, I don't mind doing it. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air. Your Astronomy Society is really in deep trouble. I'll remind you one last time. Ai Qing finally raised her head and glanced at the tag on Huaisher's chest. It's not you, it's us. Of course, I don't mean to give you a sense of collective honor. If something happens to me, you won't be able to get away with it. I get it. You mean we're in the same boat, right? Huaisher sighed. After so many days, he had almost gotten used to Ai Qing's way of talking, but why couldn't he hear any positive words from her mouth? If he was now a negative energy generator, then Ai Qing could be said to be a factory. Their output equivalents were not on the same level. How did this woman survive until now? Of course, it's through strength. Ai Qing answered without looking up. Huaisher was stunned and immediately felt a chill in his heart. Did this woman even know how to read minds? I'm not a sublimator, so I don't know those inexplicable things. If I were you, I wouldn't have all the questions written on my face. Huaisher touched his face subconsciously. Is there something written on my face? Yes. Ai Qing, who was reading the book, lifted her head to glance at him again. There was pity in her eyes. This is a vivid description of the nature of human beings. Is it a dove or a recorder? Huaisher asked curiously. Ai Qing did not want to talk to him anymore. Under Huaisher's constant barrage of noise, she finally showed a trace of impatience. She closed the book, and from the bottom of her heart, she wondered if there was something wrong with her brain when she recruited this kind of person as her secretary. What are you trying to do? She raised her finger to pinch the bridge of her nose and narrowed her eyes. If you're going to have nothing better to do after writing your report, why don't you do a thorough investigation of the top 10 haunted houses in Xin High that have been recently ranked by those busybodies on the internet? That way, there won't be people who are as bored as you who have gone crazy from exploring haunted houses. Don't even bring that up. Why sure slammed the table angrily when the topic was brought up. That ranking is bullsh*t. The first place on the ranking is my house. Why do you think my house is a haunted house? Isn't it just a bit deserted and poor? If I had the money, would I not have fixed the door? In the past 2 days, I've already chased away 4 waves of crazy people who came to take pictures. Ai Ching sighed helplessly. So, what are you trying to say? I just want to ask. Huai Shi suddenly became shy. He rubbed his hands and forced out a fawning smile. Boss, can you give me my salary in advance? Ai Ching took a deep breath and resisted the urge to throw her book at the man's face. Haven't I already given you more than 20,000 renminbi? That's all. Huai Shi held back his tears and looked at the dead crow on the tree outside the window. In any case, it's a long story. Now that school is about to start, I still owe 4,000 renminbi. I can't even afford food, much less school fees. Boss, can you give me some salary in advance so that I can celebrate the new year? It's only the end of September now. There is still half a year until the new year. Ai Ching looked at him expressionlessly. After a long time, she took out her mobile phone. How much do you want? Huai Shi's eyes suddenly lit up and he leaned forward. Hey, give me 5,000 or 6,000 renminbi. I'll pay you back when I get my salary. Beep, 4,000 renminbi in Alipay. Ai Ching indifferently put away her mobile phone. This is your basic salary for this month. Take it well. Unless there are other temporary tasks, you have to rely on it to survive until the 15th of next month. A monthly salary of 4,000 renminbi. Huai Shi was a little happy. In the past, he played piano in the bar for the orphanage. How could he have so much money? Oh, it just so happens that old Lu is going to be discharged tomorrow. I can't treat him to a meal. When did your relationship become so good? Are you jealous? Huai Shi began to get carried away. The friendship between men is so simple. Is it? Ai Ching calmly took a sip of coffee and asked casually, So, have you thought about how to explain to him that you burned the car he bought with a loan of more than 1,000,000 RMB? Soon, after watching Huai Shi leave the office with a sorrowful expression, Ai Ching finally ushered in a rare peace. In the silence, she sighed and looked at the huge amount of funds on the bank page on the computer screen, a total of $3.4 million. Forget it. Let's not tell him about the bounty on the red gloves for the time being. How did a good house become a haunted house? Huai Shi stood at the door of his house with his hands on his hip. He looked at the surrounding lush and tall trees, the green moss on the walls and the Boston ivy. Behind the rusty door, the courtyard was full of blooming wildflowers and green grass. The broken statue reflected the white light under the sun. No matter how I look at it, the scenery is beautiful and the sun is shining. After Huai Shi spat at the people on the internet who made random lists, he selectively ignored how gloomy his house was at night and shook his head as he pushed open the squeaky door. I'm back. No one responded, only the sharp sound of the door slowly closing behind him. Did you see that? How considerate. Even the door is fully automatic. Are there other places? Are there? The people who said that such a good place was a haunted house must have a bad conscience. After Huai Shi snorted, he stepped on the squeaky floor, pushed open the front door of the house, and returned to the dusty hall. Then he picked up the cup on the table and drank 2 mouthfuls of hot water before going back to his room to pack the things he needed for school. However, for a guy like him who basically relied on guessing in cultural classes, the 3rd year of high school was basically equivalent to giving up on the classes. Instead, He was preparing the materials and teaching materials for the professional performance exam next month. The Professional Performance Certificate of ABRSM could be used as a diploma in most countries in the world. With this in hand, as long as the exam results were not terrible to the point where it was unbearable to look at, it should not be a problem to get a letter from an art university. So, does this really mean anything to you now? Crow asked. Huh. Why sure was puzzled. Crow asked again. Do you think a diploma for a ascender is meaningful? Ascenders don't need to eat? Don't ascenders need to work? Why sure rolled his eyes. Do you think money will fall from the sky just by sitting at home? Crow sighed. What I mean is, for ascenders, most people don't have to worry about money. Although it's not to the point of being rich, it's definitely not a problem to have food and clothing. How do ascenders get their money? Why-sure glanced at her. Murder and arson? What's the difference between that and robbery? Can't they live peacefully and make a living? To be honest, although the Astronomy Society did give him a very generous salary, and even if he did nothing every month, he could still get a basic salary of 4,000 yuan. However, if he thought about it with his brain, he would know how dangerous it would be when he had to work. Just look at Yu Dongri, a male prostitute who gave up a good life and came to be his bodyguard, and then something happened. Not only was he forced to join the old lady's Sunset Glow Yanko group, but he was also stabbed in the back by a traitor. If Wai-Sure had any feelings about the world of ascenders these days, it was only one word: danger. A large number of border relics with unknown functions, unknown threats, and unknown uses were scattered in the modern realm. Everyone had different soul abilities and strange stigmata that had merged into the bodies of high-level ascenders. Every single one of them was enough to easily kill someone. Even Yu Dongri, a male prostitute who sold his face, could use his great beauty, self-proclaimed, to seduce people to the point that they forgot to breathe, causing them to suffocate to death. As for himself, he was just a weak, pitiful, and helpless negative energy generator. Just giving a half-crippled red glove the finishing blow almost took his life several times. Risking his life? Forget it. He should find a way to become financially independent as soon as possible, then quit his job at the Astronomy Society and honestly work towards his dream of playing piano in Vienna. At worst, he could just be a music teacher. Although the life of ascenders may be dangerous for most people, there are also people who earn their own living. Don't think that all ascenders in the world are bandits, okay? Crow sighed helplessly and raised his phone with one claw. Look at this news first. What the hell? Wai-Sure leaned over and looked at the manuscript of tomorrow's news. Rome auction house breaks record. Dusk lineage 5th grade stigmata Nidhogg with 43. 1, 2, 3 Damn, why are there so many zeros? Chapter 35. 433,410,000 ounces, Crow said calmly. Crow said indifferently. This time we will use the most commonly used currency between ascenders, origin form crystals, to settle the bill. All of them are of the highest purity that can be extracted from the border. The Golden Palace, the largest sublimator group in Northern Europe, mortgaged a complete resource-based border under its name in order to get this much money from the gnome bankers. The final winner is an Abyss archaeological team under the technical department of the Astronomical Society. They won't have to worry about funds for deep exploration for at least 10 years. Maybe you don't know what this price means, so I'll put it this way. 1 ounces of source crystals is exactly the amount of source crystals a standard adult needs, and according to the Astronomical Society's reference exchange rate today, you can exchange it for more than 2 million East Summer dollars from any of their subordinate departments. And this exchange rate is like the money given by the game system when reclaiming equipment. The black market price will rise by at least 2/3. Unless there's no other way, no sublimator will exchange their source crystals for currency. This thing is the hard currency of hard currencies. Now you can calculate how long you have to be a temporary worker at the Astronomical Society to earn so much money. Seeing that Huai Shi was so poor that he couldn't even imagine the number, Crow seemed to laugh and whispered in his ear, "That archaeological team just got lucky in the depths of hell and found a fossil. Now, are you sure you still want to live a normal life?" Huai Shi was silent for a long time and looked at Crow with suspicion. "Why do I feel like you're trying to trick me?" This made Crow, who had prepared the crutch but couldn't sell it, very sad. Huai Shi sighed. "Your next sentence is, 'Do you think I'll lie to you?'" Crow wanted to say something but stopped. "Then I'll tell you." Huai Shi sighed again. "Yes, you will. You've suddenly started to study by yourself. You're making things difficult for me." Crow lit a cigarette without any shame and shook her head. "I'm kind enough to introduce you to a lucrative job. Anyone with a bit of sense would know that it's not good to get rich overnight. In this world, the only thing that can be done just by clicking on a forward button is a repeater." Huai Shi had made up his mind not to be fooled. "No matter what you say, I won't risk my life for money." Crow rolled his eyes, completely unconcerned. Fragrant warning. JPG. Huai Shi really wanted to know what kind of stupid things she was looking at when she was surfing the internet on her phone every day. After making up his mind again, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He had only eaten a little at noon, and it was only 3 o'clock now, but he was hungry again. However, when he opened the cabinet, he was stunned. "Where are my noodles? I just bought it last week. It's a whole row of noodles." Under Huai Shi's fierce stare, Crow rolled his eyes and said, "Big brother, are you blaming me for losing the noodles? Do I look like the root of all evil? Besides, even 100 pounds of noodles can't withstand the way you eat. You eat 5 meals a day, half a pot per meal. The mountain of rice and noodles will be emptied by you, okay?" She paused for a moment and revealed a smile that made Huai Shi's hair stand on end. "And are you hungry again? Congratulations, happy growth." Crow raised his wings and clapped his hand. After ordinary people become sublimators, they will enter a second stage of development. The soul affects the body. At this stage, the sublimator's body will welcome growth again. They will gradually reach the limits of ordinary people in all aspects, and may even exceed some in some aspects. And you, who are 17 years old, are already in puberty. When puberty meets puberty, double the happiness is waiting for you. Of course, there's also 4 times the hunger and 8 times the need. So, if you don't want to underdevelop or even have your muscles digest themselves, it's best not to go to the trouble of cooking noodles. For some reason, Huai Shi felt more and more uneasy. "Then what do I eat?" "Generally speaking, it's high calorie. The higher the calorie, the higher the calorie. It's best to prepare a set of Fat Otaku Happy Pancakes, Fat Otaku Happy Chicken, and Fat Otaku Happy Water. This is also the cheapest. The downside is that you have to go to the toilet more than 10 times a day. It's easy to die from the ridicule of your classmates. At the same time, after half a year, you will suffer from endocrine disorders, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, anorexia, and other diseases." Huai Shi was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. "Are all sublimators so miserable?" "Of course not, but other sublimators are rich." At this point, Crow sighed helplessly. "It's a pity. If only there was a kind-hearted person like me who could help you make the supplement potion." She paused for a moment and blinked at Huai Shi expectantly. "But without money, I can't even afford the raw materials." "You're waiting for me here, aren't you?" Huai Shi asked expressionlessly. "If you want to swindle money, just say it. I took it from you and used it for you. How can that be called swindling?" Crow laughed heartily and said unhurriedly, "1 a day, 1 a week, then in about a month's time, your puberty period will be over. Since we're so close, I won't even ask for a processing fee. The cost price is 2,600 East Summer dollars per vial. For a month. Well, 100,000 should be enough." Spending 100,000 on a happy growth meal? Huaisher pointed at his nose and asked, "Do you think I'm crazy? But this is really a good price. After all, no one would think that a sublimator can't even afford 100,000. At this point, Crow glanced at Huaisher. "Besides, don't you understand the difference between spending money and not spending money? If you don't build a good foundation during puberty, you'll be far behind in the future. If you can achieve the best results, purely in terms of physical fitness, you can even become a soldier king. By the way, the meals provided by the Astronomy Club start at 300,000, and the effects are another matter. Of course, they can also be provided for free, as long as you sign a contract with them, if you think there's a free lunch in this world." Even if he used his brain, he would know that it was impossible, right? So, work hard, young man. 100,000 is fast. Won't you get it if you put in some effort? Crow took out a test tube from under his wings and waved it in front of him. He whispered in a demonic tone, "I support you to experience it first and pay later. Dream on. Even if I, Huaisher, starve to death from here, jump, 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 gulp." Finally, there was the sound of him swallowing. Huaisher looked at the test tube in front of him. As Crow waved, a tempting smell slowly spread out from its open mouth. An indescribable hunger was awakened in his body. Every cell in his limbs and bones was screaming for thirst. His heartbeat accelerated, his saliva secreted, his pupils dilated, and his stomach contracted. The instinctive hunger kicked aside the determination he had just made and then drilled into the tube of light green medicine. It pulled Huaisher's head and screamed crazily in his ear, "Drink it! Drink it! Drink it!" 10 seconds later, Huaisher exhaled a long breath. He felt the mellow taste of wine spread from his mouth. His limbs felt as if they were soaked in a hot spring. He couldn't help but shed tears of regret. "It's so fragrant." "Finished eating?" Crow asked kindly. "Are you going to start urging me to pay?" Huaisher was suddenly alert. "No, I mean, since you've finished eating." Crow turned into a silver-white pen and summoned the Book of Destiny in Huaisher's soul. "Then let's have a simple and happy digestive exercise first." Without waiting for Huaisher to speak, the matter branched out and pointed out. Huaisher's vision went black. Then, he died again. At that moment, Huaisher saw torrential rain fall from the sky. It was boundless, as if drowning the entire world, but he was bathed in fire. Flames rose from the viscous gasoline, covering him inch by inch. In the huge explosion, he could feel his body being torn apart, but unexpectedly, he didn't feel any fear. Instead, he felt a sense of relief, as if he had finally been freed from his predicament. He couldn't help but smile. The experience of death had never been so calm. It was so calm that Huaisher felt fear. There wasn't even the slightest resentment or hatred. He just calmly accepted it all. He closed his eyes and waited for the end to come. Even when the death record ended, Huaisher didn't react. He still stayed in that almost numb calm. This time, death was so profound that he even forgot to breathe and didn't remember that he was alive. It wasn't until his face was about to turn blue that he reacted. He couldn't help but gasp violently. He choked and coughed until he was about to vomit the noodles he ate last night. He hurriedly covered his mouth, afraid that he would vomit. He had just drunk a tube of medicine worth a few thousand. If he vomited it now, wouldn't he have drunk it for nothing? Money calms me down. Oh, it seems that you've gained an incredible understanding. Crow sighed. This kind of relief death is really rare. It's good for you to experience it more. I didn't expect that the Red Gloves guy to be able to understand a higher level of essence when he died. You're really lucky. How do you feel now? I just feel very hungry. Huaisher raised his eyes and stared at her, expressionless. I really want to eat roasted crow. Boiled ones are fine too. When he thought of that kind of peaceful death, he couldn't help but feel his hair stand on end. Although he could feel that such a quiet and peaceful death was very rare, the terror that this kind of death brought to him was much deeper and stronger than other deaths. He was so calm and collected that he could even be said to be indifferent. There was no trace of nostalgia or reluctance. Before he died, he didn't even hate himself. It was as if his life had no meaning. What's so precious about this kind of thing? He rubbed his forehead and tried to expel that calm and dead state from his consciousness. He didn't know what this sudden sage state was. Take a look for yourself. Crow directly flipped the Book of Destiny over and showed him the records on the title page. Other than the word stress period being removed, there were no changes. There was an additional emblem of a solar eclipse, which meant that he had successfully ascended. The columns for Divine Mark and Divine Mark were empty, and there were no changes to the skills below them. It was just that Death Premonition actually reached LVL1? Huaishur was stunned. A single death experience had allowed the skill, which was originally grayed out after dying so many times, to completely take shape. Half of the reason he could survive until now was because of this skill. In the end, he only died once and it had already leveled up? After all, it's a rare type of death. It's probably related to one's life experience. Let's put this aside for now. I think there's still a lot of time left tonight. Crow paused for a moment and revealed that smile that made Huaishur feel uneasy. Then, do you want to experience the new function of the Book of Destiny after ascending? Goodbye. Chapter 36. The next day, in the hospital, Huaishur saw Yu Dongri. Although his face was still a little pale, he was able to move without hindrance. He could leave the hospital in just over a week. Although the physique of a sublimator was much better than that of an ordinary person, it was very abnormal for him to be so unreasonable. The gunshot wound on his back had not completely healed, but Yu Dongri, who had been shot twice and had one of his lungs blown up, was almost healed? What kind of medicine did you take? Huaishur could not believe it. Weren't you still in the intensive care unit a week ago? What intensive care unit? Yu Dongri looked at him in confusion. Didn't Ai Qing tell you? As he spoke, he pulled his eyeball and showed Huaishur his right eye. At that moment, his pupil suddenly split into two. Polychoria. It was the strange appearance that Huaishur had seen in a hurry in the church that day. Since we are so familiar with each other, it doesn't matter if I tell you. My stigmata is called Halcyon, a relatively obscure stigmata in the Dongxia genealogy. Yu Dongri said, it only has a weak enhancement to the vision, but it can't improve the physique, and has no other functions. But when I fuse with it, it will make a record of my body like a data backup. If I am seriously injured, as long as I don't die on the spot, I can slowly recover to my original state. Huaishur was stunned for a long time, and could not help but sigh. So, the intensive care unit is also a lie, right? Yu Dongri was stunned for a moment and then his eyes showed pity. Although I don't understand what Ai Qing said to you, it seems that you have been miserably deceived by that woman. Not only that, but I also lost your car, my friend. Huaishur looked away. Fortunately, I was not physically disabled this time. Otherwise, with so many loans, the money to buy the silver blood potion alone would have made me bankrupt. With that, Yu Dongri casually asked, "Oh right, where's my car? Didn't you ask someone to drive it here?" Huaishur's scalp suddenly went numb, and her gaze wandered to other places. I don't have a driver's license, so I can't drive. Why don't I find someone to take care of your car and then drive it to you? Sure. Yu Dongri nodded and did not doubt him. Only Huaishur was secretly worried. If that red Maserati turned into a cherry QQ after maintenance, would Yu Dongri find a tree to hang himself? He was discharged from the hospital without a word. While calling for a taxi, Yu Dongri smoked a cigarette and suddenly said, "Oh right, about the red gloves, thank you." Huaishur was stunned for a moment, and then realized that he seemed to have already known. His heart suddenly sank to the bottom. Sorry at that time, but Yu Dongri patted him on the shoulder and interrupted him. So, don't worry about the car, I have insurance. Huai Shi was stunned for a long time, and suddenly felt moved. However, he did not notice that Yu Dongri quietly turned his back to him and wiped his bitter tears while he was moved. He was distressed about the money. If it were not for his birthday and several rich women sent him a bunch of gifts, he was afraid that this time he would really vomit blood. Forget it, let's not talk about this. He waved his hand, stopped a taxi, and called Huai Shi. Today is the day that I said I was going to be discharged. If you feel bad, you might as well treat me to a meal. Even though he said that he was going to beat Huai Shi up, in reality, he still had a sense of propriety. He found a light restaurant and casually ordered 2 dishes. During the meal, Huai Shi also gave Yu Dongri the gift that he had carefully prepared for him. Yu Dongri looked at the big box of Overlord growth suit with mixed feelings. He wanted to say something, but he did not. As expected, he should have just let this grandson be beaten to death by the red glove. After the meal, as the two chatted, Huai Shi asked, "Since you're now out of the sea of suffering, what do you plan to do next?" "I haven't decided yet. My flight is next month, so I'll go out and have fun for a few days. Before this, I was so bored. During my sentence, I couldn't even leave Xinhai, and I had to report my location to the inspector every day." Speaking of the past, Yu Dongri looked like he could not bear to look back. "Now that you've taken the blame, you've jumped into a fire pit. That woman, Ai Qing, is not a good boss. Even though she has plenty of protection, she will not cheat you of your money, and she will accurately pinpoint the limit of your ability. As long as you're not dead, she will use you as much as she can. In any case, be careful. Find a way out for yourself. Even though the Astronomy Society is a large organization, the benefits it provides are not enough to cover us cannon fodder." Huai Shi laughed drily. "Even though Ai Qing is a bit hard to get along with, it shouldn't be that bad, right? Even though I don't know what happened between you and her in the past, the last person who thought that way was her original boss, the previous inspector of Xinhai." Yu Dongri chuckled coldly. "At the time, your position as the confidential secretary was still hers, but a few months later, she was promoted to the official position. According to rumors, the poor thing from before is still in Africa. I can only say that she is from the Yin family. Once you're caught, it's over." "Yin family?" Huai Shi was startled. His mind was confused. He seemed to have some recollection of this name. "Never mind, let's not talk about this anymore." Yu Dongri shook his head. He did not want to continue this topic. "Didn't you say that you wanted to find the nearby Ascender fair when we were having dinner? Go pay the bill and then we'll leave." God knows how long it had been since it was cleaned. There was a person sitting at a table with his back to them, playing games with headphones on. Hey, okay. Yu Dongri kicked a chair. "Business is here. Why are you still playing?" "Wait a minute, my teammates are all AFK. This round, it's up to me to turn the tables." "You've already given away 8 lives, what's there to turn the tables?" Yu Dongri kicked off the socket and pointed at Huai Shi. "I'll introduce you to a customer, my little brother. Have some conscience." The person playing the game turned around. It was a middle-aged man with an unshaven face, looking prematurely old. He looked at Huai Shi for a long time in astonishment. "You're already a prostitute at such a young age?" Lu Dongli's expression changed abruptly, as if he was frightened. He slapped the back of his head and said, "I told you not to make wild guesses when you have nothing better to do. What if you guess something wrong?" Okay, what do you want?" The man wasn't angry. He helplessly got up and waved at them. "The things are at the back. Follow me. Just call this guy detective. Although he's terrible, try not to reveal your real name when communicating with unfamiliar ascenders. Find time to find a code name for yourself." Yu Dongri gave one last warning before sitting down on the sofa outside. I'll wait for you here. If you can't estimate the price, just call me. Seeing that he was considerate enough to stay outside, Huaishur heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. There was an empty room at the back of the room. It was filled with cupboards and a computer. It looked like a storage room from somewhere. There was also a large safe. This is the first time we've met. I didn't expect there to be a new ascender in Xian High. The detective extended his hand. How should I address you, little brother? Huaishur followed Lu's order and didn't give him his real name. When they shook hands, he showed a standard smile and introduced himself. Little Peppa from Huai High Road. The detective's face twitched. This was the first time he had heard such a refreshing nickname. Okay, I'm here from yesterday's delivery service. I have everything you need. If you're looking for something more unusual, I can order it for you online. There's no need. I'm not here to buy anything. Huaishur waved his hand. He leaned forward and pulled open the zipper of his jacket. After making sure there was no one around, he lowered his voice and asked, "Brother, do you want some powder?" Chapter 37. What the hell is this? The detective was dumbfounded. He had been a middleman for so many years, but he had never seen such a strange scene. Ahem, I'm talking about this. Huaishur coughed twice, took out a glass bottle from his pocket, and placed it in front of the detective. The bottle was full of ash. This was the simplest way to make money that Crow had come up with for him. As a rare essence, ash was a necessary base for some alchemy. However, due to the limited range of applications and the fact that the material itself was not difficult to find in the deeper regions, it could not be sold for a high price. Wait a minute. When the detective reacted, he immediately took out his phone and made a call. Hello? Uncle, I remember you placed an order for sedimentation at the border a few days ago? There's a customer here who wants to sell it. Why don't you come over and take a look? Within a few minutes, the computer screen lit up. What was even more strange was that the light on the camera transformed into the shadow of an old man. As if impatient, the old man walked over and instructed the detective to pour out a few grains of ash from the bottle and throw them into a solution that Huaishur could not name. Soon, looking at the reaction of the solution, his expression calmed down a little, and he slowly nodded. Nowadays, it's rare to see such pure ash in the modern realm. Let's sell it at the premium price. I'll take it all. The old man revealed a rare genial expression and glanced at Huaishur. If you have more ash in the future, contact me. I'll buy it at the market price. After that, he disappeared. The detective did not say anything else. He took Huaishur's bottle and weighed it. After removing the bottle's weight, it was about 300 grams. Usually, such a bottle of iron sand would weigh more than a kilogram, but the actual weight of the ash was much lighter than it looked. This was all that Huaishur had accumulated over the past few days. If he wanted to get more, he would not be able to do it. After all, he was not the kind of person who liked to look back on the past and feel sorry for himself. He could only condense the ash by constantly reading the death record. After calculating for a long time, the detective looked up and asked, according to the recent transaction price in the market, it's a total of 84,000 yuan. I'll be the middleman and take a 20% commission. I'll give you his business card later. Next time, I won't be involved. You can contact the buyer directly. How about it? Huaishur had no objections. After all, the middleman was supposed to make a profit from the price difference. Furthermore, he was able to obtain 80,000 yuan so easily. This was the first time he was looking forward to his identity as a sublimator. Before leaving, Huaishur followed Crow's instructions and spent some money to buy a more precise set of dry pots and other materials. The cheap set at home was good enough to fool the chemistry classroom, but it wouldn't be of much use when it came to actual use. Just the simplest set of tools here cost Huaishur more than 9,000. If it wasn't for Crow's repeated insistence that it was necessary, he would have made do with it. As for the remaining 70,000, he did not intend to give it all to Crow. That guy always gave him a 50% discount. Even if he only gave him 50,000 yuan, it was enough for him to take medicine for half a month. If he used the remaining 20,000 for living expenses, it would last him a long time. Huai Shi intended to save 5,000 for his daily expenses. He would first spend some money to clean up the Chalcedony Hall. He would reinstall the glass and paint the outer walls. If he did it himself, he would save a lot of money. The remaining money would be used to buy a better set of strings for the cello, buy a few chairs, and tidy up the hall. He was afraid that there wouldn't be much left. After leaving with the tools in his hand, Huai Shi was still immersed in happiness. He thought that the wild dogs on the roadside were cute. Yu Dongri looked at his silly expression, shook his head helplessly, and walked in front of him. But just as Huai Shi was about to say goodbye and go home, he suddenly trembled. His footsteps stopped and he suddenly turned around. On the desolate street, there were a few hurried pedestrians, a few cars driving by, and a stray cat that had climbed over the wall and slowly walked away. At that moment, he felt that his death premonition skill had activated on its own, followed by a needle-like chill that poked at the back of his neck. An intuition that didn't need to be spoken at all emerged in his mind. Someone wanted to kill him. But then, the death premonition quickly dissipated, as if it was an illusion. Only the residual chill lingered in his heart. What's wrong? Yu Dongri noticed his abnormality. Nothing. Huai Shi smiled calmly. Let's stop here. I'm going home. Okay. Yu Dongri waved his hand. Remember to come out for dinner before you leave. Huai Shi responded and turned to leave. The death premonition was directed at him, and it had nothing to do with others. Now that old Lu was finally discharged from the hospital, why should he drag him into his own pit? It was rare that Huai Shi actually took responsibility. But which bastard wanted to kill him? Oh my God, I feel like I'm being targeted. In the hall of the Chalcedony Hall, Huai Shi looked at the crow in front of him. Crow pooping a dream. Do you have any ideas? It's hopeless. Just wait for death. Goodbye. The crow calmly replied with 3 emojis, unhurriedly checking the things that Huai Shi brought back, as if it was a common occurrence. What's the point of asking such a simple question? If someone wants to kill you, you should kill them. Isn't that the right thing to do? How do I kill them? Conjure an axe. Huai Shi sighed. He knew his own strength. He didn't look like the crown prince when he wore the dragon robe. Even if he became a ascendant, he could only deal the finishing blow. Even a crippled red glove could beat him up. If someone came out of an alley one day and took out a Bobo Shah to kill him, he wouldn't be able to resist. That's why I said it last night. The crow raised its head and smiled happily. Do you want to try the new function of the Book of Destiny? Although he had a bad feeling, Huai Shi still nodded helplessly. Thus, the Book of Destiny opened, and the crow turned into a pen and pointed downwards. Huai Shi's vision instantly went black. When he opened his eyes, he smelled the pungent smell of blood. In the dark basement there were corpses everywhere. A thin man with half his body rotting roared at him, stabbing forward with his left hand covered in carapace. Huai Shi subconsciously took a step back. He didn't even have time to react before he felt the sharp pain of his body being pierced through. Then, the man raised his deformed and swollen right hand, pressed it against his head, and squeezed. Crack! He was dead. In the darkness, a large blood-red word, noob, slowly appeared. What the hell? What's going on? Huai Shi jumped up from the chair in pain and glared at the crow. Apart from the word, noob, mocking me, isn't it the same as before? The crow asked, didn't you notice any changes? Huai Shi was stunned for a moment, then he remembered that in the death record, he seemed to have taken a step back? Yes, that's right, he was no longer passively experiencing it as a spirit. Instead, he was reacting to death for the first time. Is this the new function? Yes. Crow nodded. If you used to be a cloud player by watching the streamer's videos, now you have installed a certain software with a Valve icon and can try to play games by yourself. Well, if that's the case, it's not a bad thing to not be a freeloader. That's enough. Huai Shi rolled his eyes. He didn't know where this guy learned so many dirty words. But it seems that it's best not to let you play a difficult game for the first time. The crow pondered for a moment. In the current record of the Book of Destiny, the most complete part is the red gloves part. It's better to find a beginner's tutorial for you first. But before that, raise your left hand. Yes, just like that, point one finger up and put the other fingers away. Like this? Huai Shi raised his left hand in a daze, not knowing what to do with it. What's the use of it? You'll know soon enough. The crow smiled mysteriously and skillfully took out her phone to take a picture. She waved her wings at him. Have a safe journey. Huai Shi instantly collapsed on the chair and fell into a deep sleep. Then, she opened the Photoshop software and skillfully marked Huai Shi's picture with a line of words. I want to be beaten up. New emoticon pack get. Then, the beating began. When Huai Shi finally understood the meaning of this posture, he was already in an unfamiliar training ground, being beaten up by a burly man barehanded. That set of Roman martial arts, which he had once seen in the red gloves, was now in the hands of this unknown opponent. It was simply amazing. Especially when he attacked, there was absolutely no mercy or hesitation. He was directly aiming to cripple him. As soon as the whistle sounded, a flying kick almost broke his neck. Then, with a skillful flip in the air, he landed on the ground and grabbed with his bare hand. Crack! Huai Shi's right hand broke. What are you waiting for? Number 7944. On the side of the training ground, the cold man with his hands behind his back said sternly, Did everything you learned go into a dog's stomach? Pick up the dagger and kill him. Or it doesn't matter if you're killed by this death row criminal. The cold tone of his voice expressed his attitude without reservation. Either die as a cripple, or kill this opponent with a sneer and earn his value. Huai Shi took a deep breath. In a short pause, he bent down and reached out to pick up the dagger from the ground and held it tightly. Sometimes, he couldn't help but thank himself that this scene was just a dream. This way, he didn't have to think too much. He could pick up a weapon and kill someone without caring about the law, morality, conscience, or other considerations. Perhaps this was the scariest part of it? When he was familiar with all this, how could he be willing to return to his former ordinary life? For some reason, he found it hard to resist. Come! As the instructor whistled sharply, Huai Shi rushed forward. Then, he died. In fact, Huai Shi was as fierce as a tiger. After dealing 2.5 damage, he finally succeeded in cutting his opponent's neck. He won. But at this time, his waist was basically broken, and 3 of his limbs were broken. When he tried to ask the instructor for help, the instructor indifferently walked forward and twisted his neck. The last thing he heard was, "You betrayed the Empire's expectations of you." Chapter 38. What the F***CK Empire? Are you from the Shimada family? After Huai Shi opened his eyes, he felt like vomiting. Shouldn't he have recovered his HP and gained 2 more skill points after defeating a strong enemy? He looked at the dust on the ceiling helplessly. Where am I? Who am I? Where am I going? Do you want to continue? Crow seemed to be snickering. He sighed as he recalled the murderous intent he once experienced. It was as if he could feel the gaze that was spying on him in the dark. How many generations of bad luck did he have? Continue. He gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and sank into the darkness again. Crow shook his head in pity, took out his phone, and added another line under the emoji pack. 2 rounds is fine. So, the beating continued. The beating continued until the afternoon of the second day. When Huai Shi was finally able to pass without any injuries, he felt like he was about to cry. This red gloves guy really didn't have it easy. After rejecting Crow's suggestion to continue, He took a hot shower with the rest of the electricity bill paid by old Lou, changed into a black suit that was only worn for formal performances, and prepared to go out. "It's rare to see you dressed up so well," Crow teased. "Where are you going to ask the little girl?" "The funeral parlor." Huai Shi sighed. There was no little girl. Today was the day of Lao Yang's cremation. No matter what, he had to go. The couple had always been good to him, although the one who was good to him was his sister-in-law. But in this day and age, how many people were willing to give you a chance to be self-reliant when you were at the most difficult time? Even if this guy tricked him, he still helped him in the end. To some extent, it was all thanks to Lao Yang that he was able to keep his dignity and live until now. He didn't have to pick up trash and do illegal work. Besides, although Lao Yang was sometimes unreliable, Huai Shi was not a high-end talent. After so many years, everyone had tricked each other, and they were almost used to it. Weren't all so-called friends like this? Now that old Yang was leaving, he had to send him off no matter what. Even though he hurried all the way, by the time he arrived at the funeral home, the farewell ceremony was almost over. Lao Yang had been a middleman all his life. He had a wide network of friends and relatives when he was alive. Now, there was a huge crowd of people who came to send him off. Huai Shi followed the line in silence. When it was his turn, he didn't dare to look. He put down the flowers in his hand, avoided his sister-in-law's gaze, and ran to the back with his head down. Although Lao Yang died in the church in Laotang, the official cause of death was a car accident. After being restored by the funeral parlor, the unrecognizable face had regained some of its former charm. It looked as if it had fallen asleep and was carefree, which made people feel uncomfortable. This bastard had spent most of his life for money, and in the end, he finally sold himself for a good price. He got what he wanted and died without any regret. According to the people who came to send him off, when he was counting his inheritance, this guy really left a large sum of money for his wife, which was enough for her subsequent treatment. After hearing a few words, Huai Shi walked a little further away. He didn't want to listen to it anymore. After the farewell ceremony, the body was sent to the back for cremation. To Huai Shi's surprise, although her eyes were a little red, his sister-in-law didn't cry from beginning to end. Instead, she organized Lao Yang's final farewell ceremony in an orderly manner, making him leave with dignity. That bastard, how did he marry such a good wife? Huai Shi's mood became more and more complicated. Soon, the funeral was over. When the guests left, Huai Shi received a message from his sister-in-law, asking him to go to the back. In the family room of the funeral parlor, the woman drove away all the irrelevant people, closed the door, and took out a thick envelope from her bag. What does this mean? Huai Shi was stunned. He looked at the envelope on the table. If there was money inside, it would be at least 10 or 20,000. Take it. This is what Lao Yang owes you. She smiled as if ashamed. In the past, he did so many things for me. In the end, it should be sister-in-law who has wronged you. Xiao Shi, you're a good girl. You didn't say anything when you were cheated, but you can't always owe him money. Now that he's gone, I think that I should make sure he's clean. If you really want to make me feel better, then don't decline anymore. Huai Shi was silent. He looked at the envelope on the table for a long time, then slowly shook his head. What's there to owe? He said softly, in the past, when I didn't know anything, I always thought that it was natural for others to treat me well, because I would repay them 100 or 1,000 times in the future. But after I became more sensible, I gradually understood that sometimes, when those people helped me, they didn't expect me to repay them in the future. Even if Lao Yang heard this, he would laugh at me, right? For me, when I was at my most difficult time, Lao Yang helped me. That's enough. Nothing else is important. There's nothing that you owe me and I owe you. He slowly pushed back the envelope on the table and said seriously, so, even if there's a little bit of my share in this, please treat it as a small repayment from someone who has been helped by you. Sister-in-law was silent for a long time. She didn't say anything to refuse. She just lowered her head, wiped her nose, and forced a smile. If Lao Yang was still alive, he would be ashamed to hear what you said. No, that guy would be immensely proud of himself, right? He would put the money away neatly, stuff it into his wife's bag, and then happily tell him that he didn't want it. It's too late to regret it now. He would take his wife to eat something good tonight. How did this bastard get such a good wife? Huai Shi sighed. At the funeral, Huai Shi didn't go with them. It was sad enough to attend one farewell party. There was no need to be sad twice because of Lao Yang. Plus, he really didn't want to see his sister-in-law cry. After saying goodbye, he prepared to go home. Unlike when he came, he was in a hurry to rent a house. When he went home, he chose to take the public bus to save money. He had to change 2 lines to cross the entire city before he could reach his home on the other side of Xin High. Apparently, it was convenient after the subway was opened, but the subway in Xin High was said to have started construction when Huai Shi was born. After so long, there was still no sign of it. Plus, Xin High was a medium-sized city. There were only so many people coming and going in the city. Even though it was a bit congested during the rush hour, it was impossible for there to be no subway. After some time, people didn't have much hope. During the long wait, he opened the WeChat that he had closed for 100,000 years to see if anything was up. Thanks to the pressure of being poor for a long time, his interpersonal relationships were lacking. He only had 1 or 2 acquaintances, and almost all of them knew about his situation. Therefore, there were no random people who came to find him for the whole summer. Other than the class WeChat group, which had now become a group for mobile games, there was almost no news. Huai Shi scrolled up and realized that other than the daily messages of parties and treats, there was only the notice of the music room's adjustment after school started and a bunch of stupid pictures. The sad thing was, Huai Shi realized that the picture of him standing in front of the brothel had been made into an emoji pack. Can you guys be more humane? Huai Shi was furious. Then he found all the pictures of the people who had sent him the emoji pack, added a panda hairstyle, and posted them one by one. Just as the stupid netizens were fighting with each other, his movement suddenly stopped. He felt a malicious gaze on him from the last row of the bus. Perhaps it was because of the growth period that Crow mentioned, or because he had gotten used to the feeling of death. Huai Shi was now more sensitive to other people's malice. Even though it was not at the level of mind reading, after being stared at the whole way, it felt like there was a caterpillar crawling around his neck. It made him nervous. Through the window of the bus, he could see the man in the last row with a cap who looked like he was sleeping. He was the source of the malicious gaze. When he saw the man take out his phone to send a message, Huai Shi jumped up and rushed off the bus when it reached the stop. As he expected, after the man was stunned for a moment, he chased after him without leaving a trace. In the busiest pedestrian street in the busy city center, he strolled leisurely like he was taking a stroll. He even stopped to buy a pack of cigarettes, but from beginning to end, he followed Huai Shi closely, not letting him out of his sight. Looking at the strange expression on that person's face, his wretched gaze, and his bulging chest muscles, Huai Shi suddenly trembled. Her chrysanthemum clenched, and an ominous thought flashed through her mind. Damn, is he a perverted gay? After strolling for 10 minutes, Huai Shi could conclude that the bastard behind him was definitely following him. Otherwise, even if it was a coincidence, it wouldn't be so coincidental as to enter the same public restroom. Pretending that nothing happened, Huai Shi began to speed up on the crowded pedestrian street. He passed through 2 shopping malls, turned a few streets, and walked into the old town square. The person behind him turned left and right, never letting him out of his sight. But after turning a corner, he found that Huai Shi had disappeared from the street. Just as he looked around in shock, he saw the boy behind a glass door took out 5 yuan from his pocket. After bargaining with the counter auntie for half a day, he shamelessly changed his hand. Then, he walked into the door behind the lobby. The stalker froze for a moment, looked up in shock, and then saw the shop sign. Spring Bathhouse. Chapter 39. The stalker had a lot of questions in his head. He took out his phone and sent a WeChat message. Then, he pretended to be strolling and walked in. He spent 15 yuan to change his ID and pushed open the door of the changing room. A gust of hot and humid steam hit him in the face. Between the rows of cabinets, naked men were walking back and forth to change, but Huai Shi was not in the room. He only had time to see the rubber curtain that led to the bathing area move. Someone had already walked in. Suppressing his confusion and anxiety, he pretended to be calm and opened the cabinet. He took off his clothes and walked to the bathing area. When he lifted the rubber curtain, he saw the expressionless young man in the steam that hit him in the face. His clothes were intact. He froze in place. "What the hell? Why are you following me?" Huai Shi asked directly. "What did you say?" The muscular man's face twitched. Soon, he looked puzzled. He did not understand at all. He waved his hand impatiently and said, "Can you move aside?" "Sorry, I can't." Huai Shi sighed and took a step forward. Bang! The stalker's vision went black. Then, he heard the heavy sound of a fist hitting his face. His feet slipped and he fell to the ground. "Let me ask you." Huai Shi squatted next to him, looked down at his face, and repeated the question, "Why are you following me?" F***ck. The burly man was furious. He raised his arm and wanted to slap Zhang Zian in the face. But as soon as he raised his arm, his vision went black again. Huai Shi punched him with all his might. Bang! Under the stunned gazes of the people who were changing, Huai Shi reached out and pulled his hair. He lifted his head and pulled him into the changing room. Then, he violently smashed his head on the wardrobe. Once, twice, thrice. A huge dent appeared on the thin iron wardrobe. The man struggled hard, but he could not break free from Huai Shi's hand. For the last time, he asked, "Why are you following me?" F***ck. In the severe pain, the stalker cursed and kicked Huai Shi with all his might. He didn't care that his hair was torn off. Taking advantage of the moment when Huai Shi let go of his hand, he scrambled to get up from the ground. He didn't fight back. Instead, he ran straight toward the exit of the changing room. With a bang, the cheap wooden door made of plywood was smashed into pieces. The long spring holding the door handle whipped his body, leaving a bloody wound. He almost fell onto the counter. Just as the auntie at the counter screamed in shock, he grabbed the baskets on the counter and threw them at the young man who was chasing after him. Then, without even a towel, he rushed out of the bathhouse's door and ran with all his might. Huai Shi chased after him madly. Offense and defense changed. Now, the stalker was running around the streets with his butt bare, not even wearing slippers. Huai Shi was right behind him, hot on his heels. Ignoring the unusual feeling and pain of stepping on the ground with his bare feet, he faced the screams of passing women like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. He didn't know if it was because he sacrificed his dignity in exchange for power, or because he was liberated by dozens of mobile phone cameras, but the guy's speed increased again. Huai Shi couldn't catch up for a while. Finally, he couldn't run anymore. Huai Shi blocked him in the alley. Panting, he moved back and found that there was no way back behind him. "Why are you following me?" Huai Shi stood at the entrance of the alley and looked at him calmly. "Are you going to be straightforward, or do you want me to find the answer myself?" "I don't know." The naked stalker leaned against the wall and tried to breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about. It seems to be the second choice." Huai Shi was silent for a moment, then looked up at him. "To tell you the truth, I don't want to do this." At that moment, the crackling sound of knuckles rubbing against each other suddenly sounded in the alley. Then, the stalker saw a black shadow rapidly enlarging in front of his eyes. Under the trampling of that pair of old leather shoes, the stone bricks of the alley suddenly sank, and squeezed out the stinky sewage below. And Huai was already in front of him. Bang! The stalker suddenly bent down and felt as if his lungs were about to be squeezed out of his mouth. His bare feet were almost detached from the ground, and his arms in front of him were also thrown to the sides under the violent impact. Without waiting for him to regain his footing, the descending fist had already turned into a palm, pushing his face back and back until, bang, his head hit the wall. He subconsciously wanted to bend down, but then, he felt a chill in his crotch. In the whistling wind, something kicked between his legs. There was a strange cry. His eyeballs almost jumped out of his face. Go to hell! In the severe pain, his face became ferocious. While dodging, he picked up the wine bottle on the ground, smashed it, and stabbed Huaishi's neck. But then, he felt a pain in his wrist. His arm was twisted at a strange angle, and the wine bottle was stuck in his thigh. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Then, the sharp pain of his broken arm and cut thigh burst out. He screamed in horror, and then found a hand on his neck, lifted him up, and smashed him against the wall. Huaishi looked at the distorted face and roared angrily, "What? Why did you follow me?" The silence came suddenly. The man suddenly stopped struggling. Looking at Huaishi's furious face, he laughed as if he had seen a joke. His twitching face squeezed out a smile, but it was unknown whether it meant mockery or flattery. His lips trembled, and he opened and closed with difficulty, as if he was confessing. "I want to get some money." Huaishi was silent. He looked at the old suit on his body, whose sleeves were beginning to come off, and the pair of old leather shoes with unstitched soles. He tried hard to believe this sentence, but in the end, he couldn't help but lower his eyes. He slowly let go of his hand and let the man fall to the ground. He tried his best to gasp, cough, and spasm in pain. "Okay," Huaishi suddenly said, "I'll give you money." Just as the man looked up in shock, he reached out and pressed his hand on his mouth and nose. Then, he poured the expensive ashes into his mouth. At that moment, as his fingers squeezed, the closed mouth let out a shrill cry. The man suddenly convulsed. Ignoring his injuries, he struggled on the ground. Indescribable fear and sorrow poured into his body, ravaging his soul. Muffled sounds kept coming from his throat, but Huaishi held them in a tight grip, unable to release them. That was until Huaishi heard the sudden sound of brakes coming from the alley behind her. As the van drove off, several men wearing masks jumped out of the van and blocked the entrance of the alley. Their palms were bulging, and they didn't say a word. They only looked at the teenager in the alley with malicious eyes. In the silence, Huaishi finally let go of the stalker in his hand. He slowly turned his head and looked at the group of unfriendly people. He finally understood why the guy took him to such a place. "It's him." As the stalker lying on the ground spasmed and raised his hand to point at Huaishi, the person in the front reached out and pulled out a machete with a dark green string wrapped around it. Then, he saw the trace of various knives. Huaishi was stunned. He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "Doesn't anyone want to explain anything?" he asked doubtfully. "For example, as an employee of the auto repair shop, it's reasonable to carry knives with you?" A strange laughter came from behind him. "Someone spent money to buy your life." In the midst of coughing, the man lying on the ground struggled to prop himself up with one hand. His twisted face squeezed out a sneer. "Be sensible, don't struggle. It's too ugly." Huaishi was silent. He raised his foot and stomped on the man's head. Bang! The man fell to the ground completely and stopped moving. Huaishi turned back and looked at the approaching people. He couldn't help but sigh. "It seems that there's no way to be kind, right?" No one responded to him. In the dead silence, Huaishi raised his hand and unbuttoned his jacket. Then, he took off the suit that had been with him for years, folded it, and carefully found a clean place on the naked man's body on the ground. Finally, he stood up, bent over, and bowed. His attitude was sincere and humble. "I'm sorry," he said. "My friend has passed away. I'm very sad." In a moment of shock, the few people were stunned. They couldn't help but want to laugh. But then, they saw the young man slowly raise his head and look at them with an expressionless face. "So, if there's anything wrong later, I'll apologize here." As he said that, he slowly raised his hands and got into a stance before his chest. He spat out the last bit of pity in his heart to his enemies. Roman Dagger Combat Technique, Level 6. This place is still so quiet. The girl in the wheelchair sat in front of the desk and looked around. It seems to have grown a lot bigger. This was the city library. To be precise, this was the underground storage warehouse of the city library. Under the monotonous illumination of the fluorescent lights, layers upon layers of huge bookshelves extended to the end of the line of sight and disappeared into the darkness. Counting ahead, in the past 60 years, all the periodicals, newspapers, government announcements and all the administrative regulations that appeared in Xin High City. In short, everything that could be printed on paper in the market was stored here. Even the electronic version was stored in the server storage room next door. It could be accessed at any time. Although this was one of the responsibilities of the city library, the fact that it could be done to such an extent was thanks to the man behind the desk. The current librarian of Xin High City, the ascender known as the Professor. Indeed, he could be called the Professor. This man had so many degrees that even he couldn't count them all. After all, his biggest hobby was to stay in this huge underground warehouse and read books. He would never leave this place. Chapter 40. In a normal person's mind, the people who were called professors were usually thin scholars with white hair, glasses, and a scholarly air. However, on a 2-meter-tall mountain of flesh, it was hard to tell. Now, this mountain of flesh was smiling at Ai Ching. The oil on his face was as bright as the sun. His hands did not stop moving. He skillfully arranged the utensils that were too delicate for his thick fingers. "Coffee or tea?" "Coffee," Ai Ching said. "No sugar." Soon, a cup of steaming hot coffee was placed on the plate in front of Ai Ching. The professor turned around on the ridiculously large swivel chair. He opened the fridge next to him and took out all kinds of exquisite cakes, puddings, chocolates, macarons, fruits from Yingzhou, Rome's 1,000 layers. "It's time for dinner. Let's eat together." He smiled and tied a napkin for himself. He picked up the knife and fork. "Recently, I've been on a diet. I won't be eating meat at night." Ai Ching looked at the table full of calories, and she seemed to be moved, which was rare. Soon, she shook her head regretfully. "You'll die from high cholesterol sooner or later. If it's cerebral thrombosis, it's already happened several times." The professor raised his finger with a smile and tapped the scar on his forehead. "Thank you for the Astronomy Society. The medical technology of the continuation unit will always allow me to continue this hobby. Even if you flatter me, it's useless. No matter what, I'm just a new employee." Ai Ching took a sip of the coffee and nodded with satisfaction. Even though she did not want to admit it, the professor's coffee was the best in Xin High. Even though she had quite a lot of rare coffee powder at home, her culinary skills were not as good as this guy's. "You've become an employee at a time like this? Then you must have had a hard time." The professor's brows creased slightly. "Will the war at the Dragon Triangle affect Xin High?" "More or less." Ai Ching knocked on the table and sighed. This was a classic example of a fire at the city gate affecting the fish in the moat. As a behemoth that was second to none in the world, the Astronomy Society had a lot of power. It was the embodiment of the dark side of the United Nations. 90 years ago, in order to deal with the threats outside the borders, the Pioneer Society proposed that the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, East Xia, Rome, the Russian Federation, the American Community, and the First Dynasty of Egypt, form the International Astronomical Society. The current ruling body of the Sky Literature Association, which replaced the Utopia, was formed by the political leaders of various countries and major monopolies. Therefore, the First World War was called the war that ended all wars. Since then, there had been no more worldwide wars, but that didn't mean that wars had disappeared. They had just moved to places where ordinary people couldn't see them. In order to fight for the right to speak, there had been many proxy wars between countries over the years. Otherwise, how could Baghdad have been reduced to ruins? Dozens of borders were sunk by the four natural enemies who fought fiercely and fell into the depths of hell. The aftermath of the battle had yet to subside. Although countries and groups would maintain the existence of astronomy meetings under pressure from outside the borders, internal strife had always been inevitable. Just like the border war of the Dragon Triangle this time. Over the years, everyone had tacitly agreed that the country and its affiliated institutions had the dominant development rights of the border. But the reason why the border was called a border was not only because it was on the edge of the present world, but also because it was like a border, a zone with thin sovereignty. Especially under special circumstances, they could be moved over the years, in order to fight for the Dragon Triangle, the Yamatai Empire's relic, the Gong family, who represented Tianjin, and the Wu family, who represented Tianjin, had been constantly fighting. It was not the first time that the two sides had fought each other, and the speed at which the sovereignty of the border changed hands was even faster than the speed at which the country changed its prime minister. In the end, after fighting for so long, the boundary wedge that fixed the border was broken. The boundary wedge could be F*King broken. Friend, you did it on purpose, right? In short, according to the calculations of the Astronomy Society, the Dragon Triangle had begun to drift. First, it drifted toward the Australian islands, then suddenly turned northwest. That's right, it drifted toward East Xia. This time, East Xia was overjoyed. The Border Development Group, Taiching Heavy Industry, had already begun to rub their hands impatiently, waiting for this piece of meat to fall into the pot. Then, Yingzhou began to be unhappy. But now, the Dragon Triangle had already drifted to the open sea. If you're not happy, who do you think you are? If the people are happy, then they're happy. Moreover, such a big thing is drifting over. You're hiding it and not letting anyone interfere. What if there's something dangerous inside? Xia's voice. Come, let me take a look. I don't know if it's developing normally, but the situation will definitely become more and more tense. What gave Ai Qing a headache was that if Xia really planned to deal with the Dragon Triangle, after a while, Xian High City would become one of the most convenient ports to the sea. In other words, there would be more and more sublimators who wanted to make money, steal treasures, and make some extra money. And what Ai Qing had to worry about was not only the crime of sublimators that would definitely increase, but also the mutual attraction between the borders. What if the Dragon Triangle's Yamatai border bumped into East Xia's coast and collided with another border? Then it would be like a comet hitting Earth. Of course, she wasn't the only one who was worried, but she would definitely be on the list of scapegoats. It really wasn't a good time to become the official inspector of the Astronomy Society. Or rather, if she wanted to protect herself, she had to prepare for a transfer within half a year. The speed of the border drifting was not fast, but based on the current trend, in at most a year, there would be a huge explosion around Xian High. Have you found a place to go? The professor asked casually. With your background, you can't even do something like this, right? Ai Qing glanced at him and didn't say anything. I'm just curious, purely curious. The professor laughed heartily. After a while, he had finished more than half of the dazzling desserts on the table, and the coffee that was so full of sugar that it almost turned into mush was also poured into his stomach. He was half full from dinner. He wiped his mouth, took out a thick file from under the table, and placed it in front of Ai Qing. This is the investigation you asked for, all the current records and information about the Savior Society, the professor said. The professor said, "According to your request, I only did the basic integration and deleted some useless superfluous parts. But I didn't add any subjective arguments, so I believe this file won't be a problem for you." AI Ching was quite confident in her reading ability. If she wanted to make a guess, she didn't need someone to guess for her and add some subjective opinions. The most important reason why she was able to become the inspector was not only because of her almost perfect exam results, but also because of her intuition, which was considered a rare talent even in the Astronomy Society. Yes, that's right, intuition. If she guessed the odd and even numbers without any evidence, she probably guessed half right. If it was a game of dice, she would be far worse than those professional mathematicians. However, it was only in the face of a complicated and chaotic situation that her intuition could reveal its value. In terms of probability, the probability of being correct was about 65%. The accuracy of more than 15% made her stand out from the complicated test, and she was evaluated as the best A-plus talent. This kind of talent was definitely the perfect match for the prophetic stigmata. Even if there was no soul enhancement, it was enough to make people look forward to it. The Astronomy Society didn't care about the 35% failure rate. In fact, they had enough ability to pay the price. If AI Ching hadn't refused the recruitment of the countermeasure room and chose to work elsewhere, the Astronomy Society would have started to train her. Because of this, she was sneered at by the trainees as a typical example of not knowing how to appreciate kindness. As an intelligence dealer, the professor knew the details of his collaborator very well. He knew all the records on the paper, but he was more curious about the things that weren't recorded on the paper. AI Ching was secretive about this and had never revealed a trace of it to others. In the silence, she focused on flipping through the thick pages. The professor didn't say anything to disturb her. He just changed the direction of the swivel chair and flipped through the obscure professional books on the table. If AI Ching had to say what she felt after reading, then only the water of the Savior Society was deeper than expected. Although no matter how you looked at it, it looked like a group of scammers, but there were too many suspicious points to count. Whether it was the origin of the strange border relic, or the ascendants who had secretly interacted with them, Wang Hai, who was confessed by the accomplice, was just a temporary leader. Before him, when the Savior Society didn't have this name, there were even traces of the existence of other leaders. It was true that they had been hiding in Laotang Town to develop in the dark, but on the surface, there were many companies in the mainland that had extensive connections with other places. Not only in Xian Hai, there were even traces that extended to other places. It could be said that there was no place that they couldn't reach. If it wasn't for the Red Gloves, who made use of this church of scammers, who knew how long it would take to discover these damn things that grew among the lower class in rural villages and remote cities. From the looks of it, it was more like a subsidiary of a huge organization. But who was the hand that reached out? There were too many suspicious directions. India's Black Sky Cult? The Blissful Paradise at the Border? The American Union's Scientific Deity Society? Or Ing Zhou's 108,000 Ghosts and Snakes? Unfortunately, the only two people who knew the details, Wang Hai and Qi, were already dead. Otherwise, AI Ching wouldn't have had to start all over again. She wasn't worried about the Red Gloves, who had already been killed by Huaishur, and the biggest terrorist organization at the border, Green Sun, behind him. The power at the border was still the border. If they wanted to do anything in the present world, they couldn't avoid the Astronomy Society that covered the entire world. What she was worried about was, what were the crazy people from the Savior Society planning to do? Had they done it, or were they still doing it? What were they planning to do? Among them, who else was doing it with them? From the bottom of her heart, she didn't believe that a piece of trash like Wang Hai, who only knew how to scam money, could use charity to infiltrate the middle and upper class of Xian Hai. Just by looking at the file, she knew that guy's life was forever a scammer. then who was adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes. Not long after, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a phone call. When she finished the call, she was no longer in the mood to continue thinking. That's all for the initial report. She put away the file on the table. I'll transfer the money to you later, but the investigation of the Savior Society has to continue. If there are any new developments, please remember to inform me. Don't worry, I will. The professor drank his tea and looked at her expression. Is there another crime of corruption and sublimation? No, it's worse than that. Ai Ching tapped on the armrest of the wheelchair expressionlessly. Thinking back to the description of Huai Shi on the phone, she couldn't help but sigh. There are many things worse than that. Chapter 41. Not long after dinner, Huai Shi once again returned to the interrogation room of the Special Affairs Department. He felt as warm as if he had returned home. Although his entire body was wrapped in bandages and the wounds on his face were smeared with purple ointment, it was not exactly glamorous. Then, he once again saw the person in charge of the Special Affairs Department that he had met once before. He seemed to remember that his surname was Fu. Was this surname very common? Or was it just his imagination? Of all the surnames, this uncle had probably never enjoyed the treatment of a top official in his life. Noticing Huai Shi's pitiful gaze, Division Director Fu knew exactly what the kid was thinking. When he thought about how the originally joyous family dinner had been ruined by this piece of news, he was filled with anger. He opened his mouth to scold Huai Shi. Huai Shi, what the hell are you trying to do? Don't you need to start school tomorrow? You're already planning to skip school at such a young age. Do you want to go to jail when you grow up? Start school, my ass. Why do you sound like the head of the teaching department? For some reason, he felt the pressure of starting school in a place like this. Huai Shi suddenly had mixed feelings. Someone wants to pay for my life. I'm also desperate. This is your second time in the palace. In less than half a month, you've been arrested and sent to the Special Affairs Department twice. You're really something. Director Fu suppressed his anger and sat across the table. He flipped open the report handed to him by his subordinate and pointed at the title. Another case of vicious assault? 7 people were seriously injured, and 5 of them are still lying in the ICU. Don't you think you're a little too full of yourself? Don't always think that my mind is filled with crimes, okay? Huai Shi sighed and pointed at the wounds on his shoulder and arm. The nearest wound was only a centimeter away from his artery. This was a defensive counterattack. Enough, don't talk to me about this. Director Fu picked up the remote control and pressed a button on the huge TV in the corner. The screen lit up, revealing the tragic situation in the alley. In the surveillance video, the crowd collided with the teenager. Then, it was like a wave crashing into a reef. Someone flew out and screamed in pain in the video. Then, it was a crushing defeat. From the first to the last, it was as tragic as rushing into a kindergarten with weapons. Everything was silent. There was no sound when the bones were broken, and when they fell to the ground, they could not scream. When the blood flowed out of their mouths and noses, there was no buzzing sound. It was as if he couldn't feel any pain. Iron hammers smashed on their bodies, but they did not take a single step back. Blades slashed on their backs, but they did not hesitate at all. They were so fierce that it was as if they did not care about anything. They knocked down everyone in sight, as if they were going to die together with their enemies. From beginning to end, it took less than 3 minutes. From beginning to end, the young man was expressionless. When no one moved in the alley, he turned around and took back his suit. He sat on the fire hydrant tiredly and waited for the sirens to sound in the distance. Blood flowed down from his trousers and formed a shallow puddle on the ground. It reflected a pair of calm eyes. It made one's blood run cold. The recording stopped abruptly. Then, Director Fu slammed the table angrily. Huai Shi, didn't you say that you don't know martial arts? I'm a natural-born god. I'm a self-taught genius. Huai Shi shrunk his neck. Do I have to be hacked to death on the spot for it to be considered normal? This was a vicious brawl. If an ascendant was involved, it would be an even bigger crime. Director Fu stared into Huai Shi's eyes. You know that the Special Affairs Division specializes in dealing with such incidents, right? Last year, I sent a kid about the same age as you to the border. Guess what happened to him? Huai Shi asked tentatively, becoming a Buddha? Isn't that great? Even the grass on the grave is as tall as you. Director Fu turned to leave. When he opened the door, he hesitated for a moment and looked back at him. I've already seen the statements of those people. I know that you fought back in self-defense. But at that time, did you really have no other choice, Huai Shi? Huai Shi was at a loss. You're an ascendant. The moment you ascend, you're no longer the same as an ordinary person. Most of the time, you often have more options and full power because you have power. Director Fu looked into his eyes. But does the so-called power have to be shown to the weak for you to feel that it's valuable? Huai Shi didn't know what to say. Director Fu turned to leave, but he heard a voice behind him. Wait a minute. He slowly turned back with a cold expression. Do you have anything else to say? Huai Shi hesitated for a long time, then raised his hand and asked weakly, I'm a little hungry. I'm a little hungry. Do you provide food here? Bang! The door was slammed shut. When Ai Qing arrived, Director Fu had already smoked half a pack of cigarettes in the office. He still couldn't suppress the evil fire in his heart. He wanted to hit someone. He wanted to beat up a miner. To hell with the protection of miners. Where's Huai Shi? Ai Qing asked. Director Fu raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the interrogation room. He's still eating our boxed lunch. It's already the 6th box. Hurry up and take the pig spirit back, okay? It's normal for him to be in puberty. Ai Qing was calm about this. On the way here, she had already learned about the cause and effect. Director Fu wouldn't put the attitude of condemning Huai Shi on the side of the official inspector. In Dongxia, the relationship between the inspector and the Special Affairs Division was often very awkward. In the end, it all came from the standpoint of both sides. As everyone knew, even an ordinary ascendant without the stigmata implantation had abilities and physical strength that ordinary people couldn't reach. Therefore, in order to deal with the threat of the border to the greatest extent, and to prevent this force that could be used to protect the present and the border from being abused in war, all ascendants had the qualification to be exempted from military service. In other words, other than the astronomy conference that passed the resolution of the 5 permanent leaders, no organization or force could forcibly recruit ascendants to fight at any time. They also couldn't illegally detain or inhumane experiments on ascendant. This law engraved in the 12 copper tables protected the personal safety and freedom of ascendants to a certain extent. But at the same time, in order to prevent ascendants from using their power recklessly, all crimes against ascendants would be increased by 1 level, and all prisons would be unified at the border. The existence of the Special Affairs Division was a violent organization established to prevent ascendants from harming ordinary people. Most of the members were undoubtedly elite soldiers who had undergone elite training. They fought in groups and used long guns, short cannons, and tomahawk missiles to teach people how to behave. In the present world with the 3 great blockades, other than the few ascendants, the biggest source of violence was the military. Not to mention Little Boy Big Ivan, or the missile bombers, just the frontal firepower of the artillery battalion and the cooperation of Bhutan was enough to make those monsters suffer. Nothing could fight against the military head-on. Whoever fought back would die. Even if it was an ascendant, and the person responsible for verifying the crime of ascendants and issuing the black letter was the responsibility of the inspector. The inspector usually wouldn't go against the Special Affairs Division. As long as they could maintain the balance between ordinary people and ascendants, that was enough. More often than not, when the Special Affairs Division wanted to do something, they just needed to call the inspector and file a case. Other than the development of the border, what they should be worried about was the conflict between ascendants for the sake of profit. In the worst-case scenario, they didn't even care if their brains were spilled out. They just didn't want to splash on the ordinary people who lived their lives. They would kill whoever dared to mess around. The present world was only so big. It couldn't even hold a few natural enemies, and it couldn't hold so many people. Thankfully, Xin High was really F*King small. There were only 7 or 8 sublimators, and they were not a big deal at all. Everyone was living a very peaceful life. Some were male prostitutes, some were second-hand dealers, and there were even some who ran a detective agency and slacked off all day. It was quite a peaceful life. After dealing with the people who were secretly causing trouble, AI Ching and the Special Affairs Division didn't have any reason to go against each other. A vicious fight wasn't enough to make them turn on each other. Neither side would put their personal emotions into work for a small matter. After a simple exchange of information, they went straight to the point. Who attacked him? A bunch of trash that can't even be seen in public. Speaking of this, Director Fu was furious. He placed the files on the table one by one and counted them one by one. Illegal gang members, human traffickers, fugitives, and people without jobs. What the F*** are they? As he spoke, he couldn't help but light up a cigarette. Seeing that AI Ching was there, he pushed open the window, took 2 deep puffs, and extinguished the cigarette. He took out a phone from a bag and asked, "You've heard of the collection of 10,000 sins, right? That dark web app?" AI Ching saw the skeleton icon on the phone screen and couldn't help but frown. In fact, although this app was a software, its nature was more complicated. It was already in the category of being a virus. Even the Astronomy Society had set up a file to target it. Unfortunately, the existence of the free border, dark web couldn't be eradicated. In short, it could be said to be the intermediary platform of the underworld. They provided all kinds of transactions that satisfied the dark side of humans, whether it was murder, kidnapping, human organ trading, slavery, or even the deeper level of stigmata, relics from the border, origin crystals, offerings. Everything was available. There was nothing that they did not want. And now, someone had posted a bounty on Huaishur, but who would be so bored as to compete with a salted fish? Chapter 42. Green Sun. Director Fu asked. Impossible. AI Ching shook her head. Even if Green Sun knew that Huaishur killed the Red Gloves, they wouldn't bother with a pawn. Those lunatics are always looking at the Astronomy Society. They're not that low. The Savior Society? That's even more impossible. AI Ching shook her head. He's just a victim. Even if they want revenge, they should target me. Huaishur's file is still confidential. At present, other than you and me, no one else knows that he's a ascender. For a moment it was difficult for the two to continue thinking. That guy really knows how to cause trouble. Director Fu sighed unhappily. Let's just lock him up for half a year. He's currently an official employee of the Astronomy Society. AI Ching stared straight at him. If you insist, then I'm afraid we can only meet in Jinling. Jinling, the upper-level organization of the Special Affairs Department, the eastern branch of the Dongxia Republic Social Security Bureau. AI Ching's meaning was undoubtedly clear. If Director Fu was stubborn, then they could only meet in the border court. Director Fu frowned. Are you really going to protect him? He's my subordinate. AI Ching replied. No, he's a 17-year-old high school student. Tomorrow is the 3rd year of high school, and the year after that will be the college entrance examination. Director Fu raised his voice slightly. If you really don't want him to be locked up at the border one day, then you shouldn't let him get involved in things outside of school. AI Ching looked at him strangely. You're actually caring about the growth of a teenager. I just hate stupid kids who pick up weapons. Director Fu touched the scar on his neck, and his expression became more and more unhappy. The more troublesome it is, the more annoying it is. He won't become the kind of person you think he is. Director Fu didn't answer him. He just remained silent, and once again recalled the eyes of the teenager in the video. It was as if he was finally angered. The moment he clenched his fist, the disguise was like a fog blown away by the wind and snow. The unpleasant superficial smile finally disappeared and was replaced by a solemn and gloomy expression that was as cold as iron. To destroy everything with such arrogance! It was as if death was nothing but a speck of dust. That gaze was like that of an executioner, and it made Director Fu instinctively feel uneasy. No, it should be said that he was disgusted. She hated people who had that kind of look in their eyes. She hated children who had that kind of look in their eyes. Miss AI, you are trying to put a chain on a beast and let it learn the rules of a domestic dog, but why sure is different from that kind of thing. He frowned. He's just living in a wild dog's nest. Even if he looks like a husky, his nature is like a wolf. Once he has seen blood, he can no longer be restrained by chains. Ai Ching calmly drank the cheap tea leaves in the office. She put down the teacup indifferently. If you're so scared, why don't you just kill him? Do you think I haven't thought about it? Director Fu asked, on the night of the Red Glove's death. When I saw him for the first time in the rain, I had the same impulse. I can't accept the existence of a potential lunatic in my jurisdiction. But what can I do? I'm 46 years old this year, and I already have a child. Do you want me to kill another child because he might commit a crime in the future? Miss AI, he's only 17 years old, and the Protection of Minors Act is on his side. He still has a chance to choose his own future, choose a future that won't hurt most people. That's what you call a domestic dog, right? Ai Ching asked coldly. Cover your ears and pretend you can't hear? Cover your eyes and pretend nothing happened, endure the pain until it becomes a habit, submit to the abuse, wag your tail and wait for the reward. Do you think that kind of life is a happy one? Director Fu was angered. He has more choices. He doesn't. Ai Ching said. His surname is Huai, just like my surname is not AI. Whether he struggles or not, he can't change what happened in the past. Just like you and I can't decide a person's future. She said, this is destined. Director Fu asked coldly, what do you think he will think of you when he finds out the truth? Who cares? No matter what choice he makes, I won't be surprised. Ai Ching looked into his eyes calmly and said word by word, but before that, I won't allow anyone to touch him. Then what are you doing? Director Fu was amused. Atonement? Ai Ching was expressionless. I'm just hoping that someone will come and settle the score with me. In the silence, Director Fu didn't say anything else. He just pointed in the direction of the interrogation room and asked her to take his subordinate away. At the same time, Huai Shi was eating to his heart's content in the interrogation room. After finishing the supper of an unknown employee, he wiped his mouth and shouted, another bowl. In the silence, the few Special Affairs Division officers sitting there didn't say anything. They just looked at him with their arms crossed, a trace of pity in their eyes. Until Huai Shi turned around and saw Ai Ching behind him. Don't always let others think that I didn't pay you a salary, okay? Sorry. Sorry for what? Because of how much you eat? Ai Ching shook her head. The Astronomy Society has a drug specifically for the development of ascendant. Do you need me to buy it for you? Huai Shi didn't know how to explain the crow incident. He could only scratch his head. I've already bought it. You dongri again? Ai Ching raised her eyebrows, seemingly unhappy. It's better not to go to the detective's place. That guy isn't easy to deal with either. Okay. Huai Shi, the Federation, readily accepted her advice. After the few officers left, Ai Ching asked, what's going on today? Sorry I caused trouble again. Don't always apologize for other people's mistakes. The girl rubbed her eyebrows unhappily and sighed. To be honest, I don't care what you turn that group of social trash into. As an employee of the Astronomy Society, when you encounter an attack, the standard response procedure even includes the option of killing. Do you understand? Don't underestimate the privileges of the Astronomy Society. Even if you pull out a gun and kill them all, there's no problem with the procedure. At most, you'll be recorded internally after going through the procedures. I'm just curious, what's your reason for doing this? Huh. Why sure didn't understand. Usually, you'd run away, right? She said. Shamelessly begging for mercy or running away when you can't beat them. It's not your style to fight head-on. Why sure was speechless. Am I a coward in your mind? What do you think? Okay, I think you're right. Why sure sighed and scratched his head. He didn't know what to say. If you want to say something, you should be angry, right? Then, when you weren't careful, you went a little overboard and ended up like this. Does it have anything to do with Lao Yang's funeral? Huai Sure was stunned for a long time before he smiled awkwardly. How is that possible? Ai Qing didn't say anything. She just looked at him as if waiting for him to continue. After a long time, Huai Sure finally admitted defeat. Okay, probably a little. He looked down at the wounds and bandages on his body and sighed helplessly. I'm scared. But no matter how beautiful my words are, when a group of people surrounded me in an alley with knives in their hands and said that they wanted to kill me, I couldn't help but feel scared. I always thought that I was so stubborn that I wasn't even afraid of death, but when I saw my friend lying in the incinerator, I realized that not only was I scared, but I was scared to death. Huai Sure sighed. I've been a happy idiot for so many years. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be happy, and I wouldn't even be able to continue being an idiot. But what can I do? I can't even live my own life well. Even if I go shopping when I have nothing to do, there will be people who want to kill me. No matter how annoying I am, this is too much, right? Yes. Ai Qing nodded as if she agreed, but he didn't know what she agreed with. Was it annoying or too much? Huai Sure smiled bitterly. He reached out to hold the table and propped himself up. The bandages on his body were bleeding again. This time, the injury was really not light. He found another bad habit that he had developed after reading the record. It was convenient to die at will in the records, but in reality, he would have to pay a heavy price. 1 against 7 sounded awe-inspiring, but it was impossible not to be injured when 7 against 1. Do you want me to give you a hand? Ai Qing suddenly asked, as if she was referring to something. Huai Sure smiled and shook his head. No, I can do it myself. You have to live your own life, right? He finally propped his body up and leaned on himself. He put on the coat that was hanging in the corner. The old suit was still spotless and covered the bloodstains. He looked like he had returned to the past, gentle and harmless. Should I ask the driver to send you home? I'll call a taxi. Huai Sure shook his phone and raised his eyebrows happily. I grabbed a taxi ticket on the way today. It will expire if I don't use it. Looking at him holding the wall and stumbling a little funny, Ai Qing fell silent. If you don't have a yearning for something outside of daily life, there is no reason to become a sublimator. She suddenly asked, Huai Sure, are you regretting it? No. Huai Sure grinned. I just haven't gotten used to it yet. As he spoke, he patted his chest and gestured an okay gesture. This is a small problem. Give me some time. The young man smiled, nodded, and said goodbye. He opened the door and whispered as if talking to himself, Give me some time. Ai Qing watched him go downstairs. She didn't try to comfort or persuade him again, although she decided that it would be stupid to face everything alone. At worst, she would continue to dig deeper. If necessary, she would save him. Who knows, maybe he could work for the Astronomy Society for a few more years. His self-esteem and Ai Qing's career were satisfied at the same time. Double the satisfaction, double the happiness. It was the best of both worlds. In silence, she looked at the page of Collection of 10,000 Sins. The reward that quietly increased, and her eyes became gloomy. $200,000? Wasn't this too cheap for an official employee of the Astronomy Society? It was rare that she decided to fulfill her responsibility as a boss. She closed the page. Her fingers swiped and clicked on the complicated symbol at the top composed purely of triangles and circles, the Metatron cube. It was a sales platform set up by the three major neutral forces at the border: Tomorrow News, Stone Cauldron Society, and the Workshop Alliance. It corresponded to information, border technology, and weapons and tools respectively. Soon, the page kept jumping and entered the page of the Alchemy Workshop, the Cavendish Laboratory, which featured a combination of sophisticated technology and border technology. Recalling the bounty of Huai Shi that had yet to be warmed up in her account, she felt a rare sense of joy. $3 million. Enough to buy something good, right? Chapter 43. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Huai Shi was woken up by the alarm clock. After being used to sleeping until he woke up naturally, he didn't even react in his trance. It wasn't until he remembered that today was the first day of school that his mood suddenly became heavy. Returning to the cage, walking right into the trap, a series of adjectives came out from his mind. Compared to this heavy weight, the pain of being chased and slashed last night was nothing. I don't want to go to school. He weakly wailed a few times and got up from the bed. When he turned over, he felt the numbness and itchiness of his wounds healing and the dull pain of his muscles straining. Thanks to his own growth and Crow's medicine, the scars on his body that would have taken a normal person 2 to 3 weeks to recover had healed in just one night. Even the scars had begun to fade. Perhaps after a while, even the scars would not be visible. But why not heal for a few more days? This way, he would have an excuse to ask for leave. Otherwise, how embarrassing would it be to go to school covered in blood? Maybe the principal would have a stroke. With a heavy heart, Huai Shi got out of bed and went downstairs. You're awake? In the dining room, Crow smiled like a good wife and mother. She even wore a white mask as an apron. Breakfast and lunch are ready for you. Huai Shi looked at the test tubes on the table and couldn't help but want to roll his eyes. Whose food looks like this? Why is there another one today? It's different from the others. Huai Shi picked up one of the slender test tubes and slightly shook the viscous dark green liquid in it. Now, his imminent death premonition was telling him with a slight chill that this was definitely not some oral liquid, but something that would take away half of a normal person's life if they drank it. As the saying goes, shit is rice, pee is a dish. Isn't this for you to eat? Can't you say something appetizing? Well, to put it simply, this is probably some border material and mineral toxins left over from the original extraction. Don't worry, it's already diluted to the point where normal people will only be paralyzed if they drink it. If you drink it, it might dissolve some of your muscles and cause some damage to your heart and brain. Do I drink this because I'm tired of living? As the saying goes, without destruction, there can be no construction. Yesterday I found that after you went through that vicious beating cough, that training under the stimulation of your subconscious, you actually accelerated a lot. This proves that at this stage, some stress and destruction will speed up your absorption. After all, the essence of anaerobic exercise is actually tearing apart muscles and waiting for them to grow back. As he spoke, Crow pointed to the measuring tape on the table. If you don't believe me, you can measure your height yourself. A minute later, Huai Shi looked at the scale on the ruler in astonishment. 8 meters? The last time he measured himself barefoot, he was still 1.77 meters tall. In other words, he had grown 3 centimeters in just 2 days? It's not just height. Weight, body fat, and blood have also changed. It's just that there's no testing equipment here, so you can't tell. After about 2 weeks, your height will probably be fixed. The next step is to strengthen the details of your bones, nerves, organs, and muscles until you reach the theoretical limit of ordinary people. Depending on the difference in your ability, some aspects may be strengthened again. The range of the hand of confinement is your hands. When the time comes, the fine operation and dexterity of your fingers will be greatly improved. After Crow finished speaking, he threw the Book of Destiny and the potion over with his wings. However, before that, you should think about how to earn back the cost of the potion materials next week. Huai Shi's expression stiffened. The heavy loan made him lose his smile. Swiping the card felt good for a moment. He sighed and pushed the door open. Behind him, Crow waved at him. Be careful on the road. Remember to take your medicine and get along well with your classmates. Get along well with my mother. Are you my mother? So straightforward. Crow was stunned for a moment and looked embarrassed. If you want, just call me mother. It's embarrassing to repeat the word. Huai Shi almost tripped on the stairs. He turned around and glared at her, then stepped on his way to school. One good thing about being an art student was that there were basically no classes in the first half of the third year of high school. Everyone was grasping the last sprint before the year before. After all, the fate of an art student was determined not only by the college entrance examination, but also by the professional examination and the on-campus recruitment of various schools. Huai Shi only needed to show his face in class, then he could go to the piano room to practice. Occasionally, he would appear in the evening self-study class. It was simply unrestrained. Other people might apply for a sprinting class outside, but for the stingy Huai Shi, it was impossible for him to fork out tens of thousands of yuan in tuition fees for these 3 months. In order to save money, he would do anything. Moreover, now that he had passed the 8th level of ABRSM, he would go to Jinling to take the primary professional examination next month. There was no need to burn money. For so many years, he had been developing wretchedly. However, when it came to the cello, he had never been afraid of anything. Even now that he had become a sublimator, he had never changed his dream of finding a proper job with the cello. Dominate the world? Harem? Compared to these, he hoped that he could have a place in Vienna's Golden Hall in his lifetime. Thinking of this, he suddenly hesitated. He knocked on the piano case behind him. Should he cut off Crow's shopping list first and save some money to replace the cello? Although it didn't have to be made by a master of hundreds of thousands or millions, it would be good to say goodbye to the factory. Just as his thoughts were running wild, he heard 2 familiar voices in front of him. Oh, Dad, you can just drop me off here. If other students see this, they will laugh at us. Why would a father laugh at his daughter sending her to school? The middle-aged man's helpless voice sounded. His tone was full of affection. Do you have enough pocket money? Dad has to work overtime these 2 days. Do you want me to give you some more? Mom already gave me some. Anyway, there is nothing to spend in school. What she gives is what she gives. What Dad gives is what Dad gives. Take it, take it. It sounded like a loving father and a filial daughter. Except for the 2 people who were talking, there was something wrong. Huai Shi couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Subconsciously, he wanted to turn around and hide behind the telephone pole. Unfortunately, it was too late. When the girl turned around, she saw him and her eyes lit up. Huai Shi is here too. I have been calling you for the past few days, but you didn't answer. Huai Shi froze and turned around stiffly. He saw the girl who was wearing the school uniform of Dongxia, which did not hide her beauty. And beside her, Director Fu of the Special Affairs Department was staring at him with his eyes wide open. Then, he forced a smile. Oh my God, so you guys are a family. No wonder, you are both surnamed Fu. Why didn't I think of this? Oh, long time no see, class monitor, and... He smiled awkwardly and looked at Director Fu behind her. Uncle Fu? The middle-aged man looked at Huai Shi in silence. His expression was so calm that it was frightening. Uncle Fu did not speak. Uncle Fu does not want to talk to you. Uncle Fu is accumulating anger points. Uncle Fu wants to kill you. Fortunately, Uncle Fu finally calmed down and squeezed out a kind smile on his old face. Xiaoyi, is this your classmate? Yes. Fu Yi raised her hand and patted Huai Shi's shoulder. Dad, this is the good friend that I've been telling you about. He taught me how to read music scores. He's really good at the cello and he's also good at his studies. Really? Director Fu smiled. Then you should get along well. Although he was smiling, the look in his eyes reminded one of the express bus to the crematorium in the eastern suburbs. Meanwhile, Fu Yi was still praising Huai Shi to her own father. Huai Shi wanted to cover her face and cry. I didn't. Do you know each other? Fu Yi seemed to have realized something. She tilted her head and looked at them, her ponytail swaying. Huai Shi glanced at Director Fu, who had an expression that said, "You're dead if you say it out loud." She hesitated for a long time before finally saying, I've met him a few times. A few days ago. Oh, I see. Fu Yi did not suspect anything and believed him. Director Fu's expression improved a little when he saw how perceptive he was. He patted Huai Shi on the shoulder and said, "Good boy, you have to study hard, okay?" He deliberately emphasized the words study well. Huai Shi felt like his shoulder blade was about to be broken by this old bastard. Seeing that the school gate was right in front of them, Director Fu stopped in his tracks and smiled at his daughter. "I'll see you off here. Hurry up, I have to go now." Seeing her classmates waving at her from afar, Fu Yi nodded and waved at her father before running towards her classmates. Only Director Fu, who was smiling as he watched his daughter leave, and Huai Shi, whose shoulders were gripped tightly by him, were left behind. Huai Shi wanted to cry but had no tears. He looked back at the middle-aged man whose face was gradually turning cold. He could only squeeze out a weak smile and beg for mercy. "Uncle Fu, be gentle, it hurts." Uncle Fu did not spit out blood. With a livid face, he lifted the hem of his jacket and showed him his gun holster. Thus, Huai Shi shut up and waited for his punishment. After a long time, Uncle Fu finally caught his breath and asked, "Are you close to my daughter?" "No. Not at all." Huai Shi shook his head like a rattle drum. "We've only met a few times." "How many times is that?" "1 or 2 times." Director Fu did not fall for his trick. He had seen all kinds of bad guys over the years. Young people like Huai Shi were unstable elements in society. At the age of 15 or 16, their hormones were like wild dogs. They might rape and rob one day. Especially when Huai Shi had a criminal record from yesterday. How could he be assured that his daughter would be in the same school as such a dangerous person? When he saw Huai Shi's file, he wanted to transfer him to another school. "Kid, tell me honestly." He put his hand on the handle of his gun and stared at Huai Shi. "What is your relationship with my daughter? What else could it be?" It was a pure leveling relationship. Your daughter only knows how to spend money on games. It was all because of me that she was able to get to the diamond level. What else could Huai Shi say? He could not say that the two of them had always been on good terms. Last time, the two of them worked together for the school's art performance. One of them played the violin while the other sang an opera, right? Needless to say, the effect was quite good at that time. This only proved that Uncle Fu was not a good parent. He did not even come to watch his daughter's performance. Moreover, in order to rehearse, the two of them spent several nights alone in the piano room. If Huai Shi wanted to, something would have happened long ago. However, if this daughter-con knew, he would definitely shoot him on the street, right? At this thought, Huai Shi could not help but want to praise him. "Uncle, your daughter is so beautiful." Chapter 44. Unfortunately, in the end, Director Fu still couldn't get rid of this little bastard as he wished. In short, after repeated interrogations, He didn't do anything to Huaishir for the sake of the Astronomy Society. However, before he left, he warned him again and again, "Remember, stay away from my daughter." Okay. Huaishir nodded like he was pounding garlic. He smiled stiffly and watched Director Fu leave. However, as soon as the opening ceremony ended, Huaishir was blocked by the girl at the door of the classroom. She pulled him aside and reached into his pocket to take out his phone. "Bro, hurry up, give me a hand. I'm about to fall into bronze. My image as an otaku goddess is about to collapse." "Miss Fu, don't be like this." Huaishir pushed her hand away weakly and blushed. "I've already turned over a new leaf. Don't worry, if I don't pay, it's not a prostitute." After taking off the little white rabbit mask, Fu Yi was no longer as pure and cute as she was when her father was around. She skillfully drove the car. "Help me get diamonds back, and I'll help you with the points for the next 2 weeks. How about it? The student union has been very strict with this recently. You don't want to be reported, right?" Huaishir rolled his eyes. Although he was an art student, the school still had requirements for class hours. Without Fu Yi's help, Huaishir would have a hard time. However, when he thought of Director Fu's expression before she left, Huaishir couldn't help but shrink back. "If your dad knew that you were secretly playing mobile games in the art room during evening self-study and that I was your accomplice, would he directly send the sublimator suppression force to kill me? Besides, which of your fans doesn't know that you're a noob? Every time it's my turn, you're always welcomed online, okay? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Remember not to run." Seeing that the homeroom teacher was about to start a class meeting, Fu Yi hurried into the classroom. Before she left, she put her hands together and made a gesture of invitation. She blinked and stuck out her tongue. She was usually so stingy in private, but when it came to maliciously acting cute, she was better than anyone else. Huaishir rolled his eyes. His heart didn't waver at all. He even wanted to run. How could he not run? If he didn't run now, he would be sent to the eastern suburbs crematorium by Director Fu. He might even have to buy another box for himself. Therefore, when Huaishir was only halfway through the class meeting, she took the opportunity to slip away when the homeroom teacher was distracted. However, as soon as he stepped out of the door, he heard class monitor Fu's angry voice coming from the classroom. "Teacher, that bastard Huaishir ran away again. Alright, both father and daughter are leaders. I can't afford to offend you." Then he ran even faster. In her impression, the school's management of the art students had always been very lax. Perhaps it had something to do with the low enrollment rate. In addition to recruiting a large number of repeaters every year, there were many preferential treatment for the art students who had an easier time enrolling. As long as the numbers on the banner hanging in front of the school every year after the college entrance examination results came out, nothing else mattered. Moreover, Huaishir's performance had always been good. He never caused trouble and his cello grades were good enough. After he received the promise that he would take extra cultural classes next semester, the Academic Affairs Office simply issued a certificate, allowing him to smoothly obtain the privileges of an arts student. He would always wander around during class, wander around when he had nothing to do, and disappear when he was on duty or something. Such an annoying creature, in the eyes of the hard-working college entrance examination candidates, was like a school stray dog. Even Huaishir didn't expect that it would be so easy for him to get the certificate. The other students would only be released after the studio or the piano room teacher came over to vouch for them. Why did it seem like they couldn't wait to put the certificate in his hands? He didn't expect that a certain middle-aged man who was watching him through the surveillance camera couldn't wait for him to get out of the classroom as soon as possible and as far away from his precious daughter as possible. It could only be said that the middle-aged man who was ready to snipe at any time was too scary. Huaishir, who more or less understood the situation, shook her head and sighed. She felt that her privacy had been violated, but when she looked at the cameras on the wall that had turned 180 degrees to aim at her, She thought about how many of her hunk brothers had their own cameras. Forget it. Anyway, it wouldn't hurt to be watched. In any case, he would skip classes if he had something to do and stay in the piano room if he didn't have anything to do. Thanks to Huaishi's excellent cello grades and various competition certificates, the school gave him a little back door in this regard. For example, there was a separate room in the piano room that wasn't too narrow. He didn't have to wait in line like the others. In any case, he was the only cello player in the school. After he entered the room and cleaned up the dust accumulated during the summer vacation, Huaishi opened the piano case and began to skillfully fish. Practicing in the piano room? No way. Directly above his cubicle was the teacher's office. The Wi-Fi speed was superb, and he never needed to use a SIM card to watch videos. It was unlike the broadband that Crow secretly used. Not only was the speed not very good, but he also had to be on tenterhooks when using it. He first browsed through the local news out of habit. It was just some soft articles like Full Sparrow Banquet hits Xian high, business booming, hard to find a spot. After the popularity of the PUBG King of the Dark Zone mode, the lousy Silent Crown game released a new MOBA-type Strife mode, which started another wave of delightful skin scams. Fu Yi's standard was actually not bad. After all, she was considered a rather popular amateur streamer. Other than relying on her face, her skills were barely passable. However, she was always careless and liked to play tricks. She also had to be an ADC. Often, she would scam 9 out of 10 times. Accidentally, the effects of the program were very good, and she actually managed to scam a lot of rockets. As soon as she entered the game, she instantly locked Hand of God. Her teammates went crazy. This kind of acrobatic character in the later stages of the game was indeed unparalleled. However, in the early stages, it was really a mess. More than once, players complained that the official design of this hero was problematic. It was too easy to target, and to survive until the later stages, it all depended on luck. You're starting to play? Huaishi sighed and could only choose Moonchant as support. Alright, who asked Daddy to love you? Then, as expected, it was 5 consecutive defeats. Not only did she successfully fall below bronze, even Huaishi's rank was successfully dragged down. Huaishi's rank had regressed too much. He hadn't played for more than a month. Originally, he could still barely heal, but now, he could only scam with her. After a few rounds of ranking, Huaishi rejected her invitation for another round and turned off his phone. As if after the event, Fu Yi skillfully took out a cigarette from Huaishi's piano case. After lighting it for herself, she threw one over to Huaishi. The way she smoked with her legs crossed was full of the aura of a bully. One couldn't tell that she was the little bunny in white from school in the morning at all. If Director Fu knew about this, he would probably give the order to shoot Huaishi, this grandson, on the spot. Huaishi himself even learned to smoke from Fu Yi. What didn't this old driver know? Huaishi wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he waved his hand weakly and looked sadly at the sunlight outside the window, as if he was an abandoned mistress. Let's not meet again in the future. What are you afraid of? Fu Yi laughed gloatingly. Afraid that he'll break your legs? Huaishi was stunned. Did he really beat you up? He did. Fu Yi held the cigarette in her mouth, and used her free hands to tuck her long hair behind her ears and tie it back into a ponytail. The last time he found a love letter in my bag, he broke the leg of the guy who confessed to me. I didn't even have time to enjoy the feeling of being pursued, and no boy in class dared to talk to me. Huaishi was stunned. And then? Fu Yi shrugged. Then my mother divorced him. Domestic violence. My mother and I, he can't control me anymore. Huaishi was stunned for a long time and sighed helplessly. Sorry. It could only be said that curiosity killed the cat. Huaishi had never been interested in other people's situations. He was curious this time, and as a result, he stepped on a landmine. It's okay. Although Fu Yi didn't continue, she didn't mind. She just waved her hand. I'll only say it if it's you. Then I'll just consider myself unlucky. Huaishe shook his head, moved his face closer, and hooked his finger at Fu Yi. Fu Yi rolled her eyes at him, handed over the lighter, and pressed it. The flame, which was adjusted to the maximum, almost lit Huaishe's hair. Looking at Huaishe's embarrassed appearance, she patted her knee proudly and laughed. It was only in a place like this where there was no one else that she would show her other side. Other than that, she had always been well-behaved and serious, keeping a distance from all boys and harmful things. She was exactly the same as the good daughter in every parent's heart, the secretary of the student union in every teacher's heart, and the class monitor in every student's heart. It could only be said that every family had its own difficult scriptures. Huaishe sighed, brushed a strand of burned hair on his forehead, and didn't say anything else. If there was really any respect between everyone, then there was no better way than to keep a distance. Life was already very bad, so there was no need to condescendingly criticize other people's lives. Among so many classmates, if they wanted to make friends, there were always better choices than themselves. Wasn't this kind of incomplete friendship able to exist and be maintained until now precisely because of this tacit distance that was maintained tacitly? Among so many classmates, she was the only one Huaishe didn't envy. At the school anniversary rehearsal, Fu Yi told Huaishe when she was smoking in front of him. Because I found that you are very good to everyone and can talk to anyone, but I don't think you want to be popular. You must not like anyone, she said, because I'm the same. Therefore, it was good to have such a corner where the two of them could mourn for each other. Birds of a feather flock together. To some extent, sick people would appear in the same tiaba to eat fake medicine, and they would definitely have a place like a sick friend club. Huaishe couldn't kick her out of his place just because she had a powerful father. Chapter 45. Clearly, she understood the nature of her father's job. Fu Yi looked at Huaishe with a strange expression. Did you get into trouble during the summer break? Yes. Huaishe nodded, not knowing what to say. Fu Yi didn't ask any more questions, only saying, there's no need to be afraid of him. He's just used to being rough and doesn't know how to be tactful. Probably everyone who's been on the battlefield is like this. No matter how good they think, they're never liked. After she wandered around for a while, she received a message from the student council for a meeting. She returned to her quiet demeanor and left. Huaishe stayed alone in the piano room until the evening self-study session. According to Crow's instructions, he took some medicine, then practiced for a few hours and completed his meditation for the day. He felt that as his body developed, the waves of origin substance became more abundant. He guessed that he would soon reach the peak, right? Soon, after the puberty period ended, he would be able to start preparing for the sacred mark. Crow said that he would choose a system and type that would be perfect for him. It would definitely be a large sum of money. Thinking about this gave Huaishe a headache, but now he seemed to be gradually getting used to this kind of heavy daily routine. Practicing the piano, chatting with his classmates, slacking, dealing with the teacher's inspection, making a few mistakes and receiving a few reprimands, meditating, making sand carvings, playing mobile games for free without spending money, doing homework, taking exams, taking time to complete the astronomy meeting, reading the records of the Book of Destiny, preparing for the college entrance exam. If you counted the number of things he had to do, it would be crazy. Even though there were many things that weren't perfect, there were also many things that didn't seem necessary, but this was the precious life he had obtained through his own efforts. Even if it was a bit hard, he would gladly endure it. Then, he left early before the evening self-study session. What a joke, it wasn't easy to get special privileges. Was he going to stay up until 9 o'clock every day and miss the last bus to ride home? Now, he was a man who could afford a monthly bus ticket. Huaishe carried his piano case, humming a song, and deliberately walked around the school building. Under the envious and jealous gazes of his classmates, he swaggered out of the school gate. Then, he was stopped by the gatekeeper. "Why, sure, right?" The security guard who was playing with his phone also had some impression of him. He pointed at the door and said, "There's a parcel for you. Just don't do it again. This isn't a collection point. Next time, I'll directly inform your class teacher to come and collect it." "What?" Why sure was stunned and looked at the pile of express delivery boxes in the corner of the gatehouse. He didn't know why. His hair stood on end. A chill crawled from his heels to the back of his head, dancing on his shoulders. Finally, it stepped on his eyebrows and stepped on the top of his head. It pulled his hair and laughed evilly, blowing a cold wind in his ears. He almost lost his balance and staggered back. "What's wrong?" The gatekeeper glanced at him and shook his head. "Forget it, I'll give it to you." "Wait." Why sure reached out and grabbed his wrist. The uncle was stunned for a moment. He stopped in his tracks and looked back at him in astonishment. His arm was actually hurt by a little brat. "Sorry, I'll do it myself." Why sure pulled him to the ground somewhat impolitely. He took the piano case and walked into the gatehouse. He squatted down and looked at the parcel with his name on it. Amidst the noise of the television on the wall, he vaguely heard the sound of the box ticking. It was so clear. Why sure squatted on the ground, motionless. He was silent for a long time until the gatekeeper impatiently urged him a few times. He slowly got up and roughly dragged him out of the door. He didn't care what the gatekeeper said. He took out his phone and dialed Division Chief Fu's number. "Hello? I'm Why sure." Why sure looked up at the surveillance camera outside the door. "Division Chief Fu, you can see me, right?" "What are you thinking, kid?" The middle-aged man suppressed his anger. "I'm a division chief of the Special Affairs Department. Do you think I have nothing better to do than to peep at you all day long?" "Forget it." Why sure sighed. "Come to the school and bring some people with you. It's best if you have anti-explosion experts. The school is going to explode, literally." "What's going on? What the hell is this? What the hell are you doing?" Division Chief Fu was shocked. He threw all the questions in life at him. When he came back to his senses, he heard a commotion on the other end. 10 minutes. Just you wait. Stay where you are and don't move." The phone call ended. Why sure called Ai Ching again. After informing her of his situation, he quietly asked the gatekeeper to wait a few meters away from the gatehouse. Of course, whether the gatekeeper was willing or not was another matter. The commotion seemed to have attracted a lot of attention. There were patrolling security guards and teachers who were preparing to go to self-study. Soon, the noise stopped abruptly in front of the pitch-black carriages one after another. The Macho Man squad filed out of the car, followed by Division Chief Fu in a bulletproof vest. He jumped out and walked directly to Why sure. "Where's the thing?" Why sure pointed in the direction of the gatehouse. Division Chief Fu did not say anything more. He waved his hand and two bulky figures wrapped in anti-explosion suits rushed into the gatehouse with the explosion-proof ball on a cart. Soon, an unfortunate piece of news came through the intercom. Division Chief Fu's face became more and more unpleasant. He glared at Why sure and waved his hand to signal everyone to retreat a long distance. Not long after, two experts took off their helmets and walked out. Their messy hair stuck to their foreheads and sweat dripped from their chins. "It's done." They helped each other take off the heavy protective suits, and then showed the box lying in the explosion-proof ball to Division Chief Fu. In the box that was cut open, there was a damned thing tied together with dense cables and circuit boards. The countdown had stopped at 1.5 hours. "It looks quite ordinary." Division Chief Fu did not take a closer look. Instead, a hand reached into the jar and took it out. He was so shocked that he almost stopped breathing. It was Ai Ching. She sat in her wheelchair and fiddled with the dangerous item that could blow her up. "What's the trigger type?" "There are 2 types. It's a combination of a timer and a trigger. It will explode when the box is opened and when the time comes. The explosives are ordinary mining explosive. They're relatively weak. They'll probably only flatten the gatehouse. The expert panted and sat on the ground smoking. If it's opened in a classroom or something, the consequences will be worrying. Division Chief Fu clasped his hands behind his back and did not speak. The veins on his hands behind his back were bulging. It's become a vicious public safety incident. Ai Ching rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She was a little troubled. Who sent it here? Soon, the footages of the deliverman were displayed on the surveillance cameras on the road. It was a hunchbacked man wearing a hat. He was wearing old clothes from Northern Express, but he did not look like a deliverman at all. His footsteps were a little staggered and he walked with a limp. His face was hidden under the brim of his hat, so his face could not be seen clearly. After passing the package to the guard, he rode away on his bicycle. But before he left, he raised his head to glance at the surveillance cameras as if he was provoking them. It revealed the twisted face that was covered in horrible burns. There was still the warmth and friendliness that he used to have. He was grinning happily. He was looking at everyone present. There was no need to think about it. As long as they saw that face, everyone present who had experienced the turmoil half a month ago would be able to recognize it. That was the former leader of the Salvation Society in name Wang Hai. Division Director Fu widened his eyes in disbelief. He's still alive? From the looks of it now, there's nothing wrong with him being alive. Ai Ching glanced coldly at the smug smile on the screen. And he still has the energy to challenge us. Soon, the short discussion came to an end. Without a doubt, this was a provocation aimed at the Special Affairs Department and the Astronomy Society. A surviving member of the Salvation Society dared to conduct such an attack in Xin High. This was like jumping off a ship at the entrance of an oceanic trench prison. They had a clear death wish. At this point, other than killing this bunch of bastards, there was no other choice. From that moment onwards, the Special Affairs Division had already started their operation. Very soon, the spies that were planted in every corner of Xin High would start to search for any trace that had anything to do with Wang Hai. Once they found any trace of him, a group of impatient brothers would descend from the sky with guns and small cannons to teach him a lesson. From the beginning to the end, Huai Shi sat on the steps with a calm expression. He didn't say anything. There was only silence. It was as if he was in a daze. After a long time, he recovered from his daze, as if he had just woken up from a dream. He looked at Ai Ching beside him. Is it over? It's possible that this is just the beginning. Ai Ching shrugged. Don't be too stressed. The people from the Special Affairs Department will send you back first. Rest well tonight. I'll inform you if there's any news. Okay. Huai Shi nodded and didn't say anything else. But after taking 2 steps, he seemed to remember something and turned back to ask, by the way, can you help me apply for leave? Ai Ching was taken aback. She looked into his eyes. After a long time, she sighed and nodded. Thank you. Huai Shi smiled and didn't say anything else. He just picked up the piano case and took one last look at the school that had returned to peace and the light in the piano room in the distance. He seemed to see Fu Yi's shadow through the window. She was looking at him from afar, so Huai Shi waved at her. He waved goodbye. After a long time, he pulled back his gaze and turned to leave. I'm back. Amid the screeching sound of the door bolt, Huai Shi pushed open the door of the Stone Essence Museum. Even though there was no one waiting for him in the courtyard, he still called out like he was going home. The iron door slowly closed behind him, as if responding to him. As soon as he entered, he saw the crow standing beside the boiling pot on the table in the hall, waving his wings at Huai Shi. Dalong, time to drink your medicine. Didn't I already drink today's medicine this morning? Huai Shi walked over, picked up a test tube on the table, and drank it in one gulp. It's an extra meal. By the way, I adjusted the formula of the medicine according to your current situation. After the crow explained, he didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he tilted his head curiously and looked at Huai Shi in front of him, as if he had found something interesting. What's wrong? Huai Shi was puzzled. No, I'm just thinking, if it's normal, you would respond when you hear Dalong drinking medicine, right? The crow asked. Did something happen, Huai Shi? Huai Shi was silent. After a long time, he slowly shook his head and turned to go upstairs to the bedroom. Nothing happened. He turned his back to the crow and whispered, I'm going to sleep. Good night. He closed the door, took off his coat, and kicked off his shoes. Huai Shi lay on the bed and stared blankly at the crack on the wall, as if he was in a daze. After a long time, he buried his face in the pillow regretfully. Damn, I'm so weak. On the branch outside the window, the crow, who was staring at all this, didn't go in to comfort him. It seems that he lost miserably. She narrowed her eyes. The collection of stigmata materials has to be put on the agenda. She went back to the table in the hall and scribbled in her book, trying to remember something, as she mused over her plans and what she had to prepare. Then, it was a long night. Huai Shi's new semester and the peaceful life he longed for came to an end in a hurry. He was on vacation. Chapter 46. After a long time, Huai Shi had a dream. He dreamt that he had finally realized his dream and walked into the Golden Hall in Vienna under the enthusiastic applause of the audience. The host was so moved that he was about to cry. Everyone stared at the greatest musician of the century with fanaticism. Then Huai Shi stood on the stage and looked at them arrogantly. He nodded slightly and raised his hand to signal them to be quiet. Then, silence came. Everyone held their breath and held back their tears. The female audience looked at him expectantly and passionately, as if they wanted to have children with him. Huai Shi glanced at them indifferently and revealed an evil smile. He took out a handkerchief to wipe his hands and threw it aside. He picked up the cello and took a deep breath. She played the song Little Widow Goes to the Grave, which sounded like she was weeping and complaining. Then, before he was beaten to death by the angry audience, he finally woke up from his dream. Lying on the bed, Huai Shi breathed heavily. He didn't know if this was a nightmare or a good dream. He just felt very complicated. Then he began to reflect on himself. Why did he come to the Golden Hall with such a broken thing? And what the hell was that evil smile? He was in a daze for a long time before he woke up. He got up from the bed and looked at the sunlight outside the window. After drinking a tube of wine, he ran to the garden and continued to daydream. Until he realized that daydreaming was not a good idea. He took advantage of his free time today and changed his clothes. He carried a bucket, a mop, and a rag and began to clean. Of course, although it was called a cleaning, it was actually just a regular cleaning. The Chalcedony Hall was so big. Even if he didn't look at the two buildings that had been empty for a long time, just the 4 floors of the main hall were enough for him to clean up for a month. He just cleaned up the door, the front yard, the hall, and a few rooms that he often used. He pulled out some weeds, carried a bucket of water to the door, and polished the dusty sign of the Chalcedony Hall again. At noon, the tables, chairs, and glass that he bought online arrived. However, no matter what, the delivery boy was unwilling to deliver the goods. After putting the goods at the door, he ran away faster than a stray dog. Huai Shi was so angry that he gave a negative review. The local furniture store did not say anything and directly refunded the delivery fee of 300 yuan. That was why people nowadays were willing to do anything just to be lazy. After putting everything away and replacing all the broken windows, the house finally looked a little more lively. At least it didn't look like a haunted house anymore. After resting for a while, Huai Shi finally began to sigh. He picked up the broom and mop and went up to the 4th floor to clean up the master bedroom again. He swept away the dust, opened the windows for fresh air, washed the sheets and blankets, and hung them out. The rooms on the 4th floor aren't bad, and the beds aren't small either. Crow, who was watching the show, landed on the cabinet and looked around the elegant and warm room. Why are you always on the 3rd floor? Look, your bed is about to fall apart. Huaishe was silent for a moment before replying, "This is my parents' bedroom." Crow didn't know what to say. "Do you still think they'll come back?" "I don't know. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're still wandering around somewhere abroad. If they're a little wild, they might even have a new child." Huaishe sat on the chair and scratched his head. After a long time, he said helplessly, "But what if? If they come back, they can't not even have a place to stay, right? Have you ever thought of a possibility, Huaishe?" Crow looked at him with pity. "Your parents might have already, huh?" Huaishe was at a loss. "No, nothing." Crow stared at him for a long time with a face full of disappointment. In the end, he didn't say anything and flapped his wings and flew away. Huaishe shrugged. After packing up his things, he closed the door and went downstairs. Then he lay on the sofa and played with his phone. He was addicted to mobile games, short videos, and the embrace of idiotic netizens. In the afternoon, when he looked down, he found that his chin seemed to be a little chubby. "I'm shocked." Huaishe jumped up from the sofa in fright and felt all over his body. There was indeed some chubby, but he was actually starting to get fat? The nature of the supplement is a high-calorie compound. Its purpose is to allow people to absorb as much heat as possible without any burden. That is, to get fat. In this regard, Crow was very calm. "You lie down and don't move every day. Isn't it normal for you to get fat? If you ask me, you should go out for a walk. And then get hit by someone?" Huaishe's eyes widened. "When I go to school, someone sends me a bomb. If I go out on the street, I'm afraid there's a car full of RPGs waiting for me. It sounds like you're in trouble." Crow cackled. "So, are you going to run away? If you want to transfer schools, there's always a way, right? Why should I?" Huaishe rolled his eyes and glared at her. "This is my school. Why should I run away? Then, do you have any countermeasures?" She tilted her head and looked at Huaishe's face. She seemed to be curious. "Do you have any insights in your heart? Have you made any decisions? Why don't we buy a sniper rifle and take advantage of the night to shoot him from the back? Can we do that?" Huaishe's eyes widened. "Yes." Crow nodded. "But you don't look like you have a hidden uncle who placed an order for you before his death so that you can start the game with godly equipment. Stop reading at the beginning. It's all fake." Huaishe rolled his eyes. He finally understood what she meant. That author doesn't even want to write anymore, and he still has the nerve to say that it's finished in stages. Haha. He's been living off women on Weibo all day, and his writing is so poetic. He doesn't look like a decent person at all. After consuming a wave of outdated authors, Huaishe propped himself up from the chair. After taking 2 deep breaths, he finally recovered a bit of energy and cooperated with Crow's physical examination today. "It seems that the border material has a certain stimulating effect on your growth rate." Crow nodded with satisfaction. "If this continues, your growth period can be shortened by at least half. And if you adjust your physical attributes from now on, your compatibility with the stigmata will also improve a lot. However, to avoid any accidents, I have to ask again. Does your family have any history of hereditary diseases?" "No." Huaishe shook his head. "Why do you ask?" "Very good. The growth period of a sublimator will subconsciously be adjusted according to the prototype in the Silver Ocean. If you have any latent diseases or hereditary diseases, it will be quite painful to make up for it. From today onwards, I will start to adjust the formula of your medicine, which may have a certain effect on your body. If there are signs of high fever, dizziness, or panic, you must tell me as soon as possible." Crow seemed to have said something important casually, and then handed over a tube of medicine. The color of today's medicine seemed to be a little thicker. If it was originally light green, it now looked like it was covered with a layer of shadow. After hesitating for a moment, Huai Shi drank it in one gulp. "I've been on the pirate ship for so long, what's there to regret?" "Very good, Huai Shi. Very good. You will have a bright future, probably." Crow nodded with satisfaction and happily flipped open the book of destiny. "Next, do you want to have another intense and exciting after-meal activity?" Huai Shi rolled his eyes at her and sighed. He sprawled on the chair again and closed his eyes. "Come on. Don't take pity on me because I'm a delicate flower." "Ha ha." Crow smiled mysteriously. "I like daring people like you. Since you're doing so well, I'll let you have a taste of meat today." Things seemed to be branching out. Huai Shi's vision darkened again. "Kill them all. Leave no one alive." First, he heard the instructor's voice in the headset, then he felt the heavy weapon in his hand, and the yellow sand blown by the wind. Outside the open window, the dry land kept flowing backward, and the dust in the air kept coming in with the singing from the radio. It was almost suffocating. But there was no cough in the car, it was as silent as a tomb. Huai Shi felt like he was playing a VR game, just like the ones the streamers often played, but the expensive game cabins were not affordable for most people. This was a fragment of the Red Glove's memory, a fragment selected from the broken records. Everything was just his past memory. Huai Shi just turned himself from a bystander into the protagonist, just like a lifelike single-threaded RPG game. He saw more than a dozen people wearing the same uniform as him sitting on both sides of the car, expressionless under the sandstorm like machines. Only the instructor's orders kept coming in the headset. "Start the operation in 10 minutes. Team A and B will surround the targets from both sides. Leave no one alive. Do you hear me?" Thus, the soldiers in the carriage responded with cheers. The car stopped at the end of the road, and the traces of a village could be vaguely seen in the distance. After so many simulation training, Huai Shi could at least keep up with their pace and distinguish the gestures and commands between each other. These guys' evaluation was too harsh. If they felt that his performance was too poor, even if he passed the exam, he would eventually be destroyed as an unqualified product. He really didn't know where the bastard Red Glove was serving. Looking at the surrounding scenery, it seemed to be a barren plateau area. He could vaguely distinguish the style of a desert country from the outline of the buildings. With the ruins of oil exploration sites on the road, Huai Shi could tell that this was the southeastern area of Subterranean Sea, West Asia. It was most likely a narrow desert area between Rome and the Russian Federation. Because of the rich oil resources, wars had continued on this land. Dozens of large and small kingdoms were constantly at war under the interference of the Big Five, and there seemed to be no signs of stopping until now. So, the mission target this time should be the stronghold of the Russian Federation, right? Rome and the Russian Federation had been wrestling with each other for more than 1 or 2 years. It might be a bit too much to say that they were irreconcilable enemies, but if there was a chance to sabotage each other, both sides would never be soft-hearted. It seemed that this mission could be treated as a New Year's summon. He had cleared the game so many times. What was there to be afraid of? Huai Shi gradually relaxed. He followed the rest of the team, lying in a hidden place and waiting for orders. Soon, gunshots rang out in the village not far away. Team A had already begun to exchange fire. It didn't take long for the instructor's order to come. Team B, attack. There was no need to shout any slogans. The soldiers who had been hiding for a long time got up and rushed to the village from all directions in groups of 2 or 3. Huai Shi was mixed in with them. He deliberately fell one step behind to let his allies take the bullet for him. But the expected hail of bullets did not come at all. Even if there were occasional gunshots, there were only a few sporadic shots. It was as if they had been knocked out. Suddenly, he felt more relaxed. He mixed in with the team and fired 2 shots at the front. They rushed into the village in a mess. Under the order, he kicked open the broken door of the courtyard and raised his gun inside. Then, he froze in place. Where is the enemy? Chapter 47. The moment the door was kicked open, he saw tobacco leaves casually piled up in the yard, tools in a mess, and dust everywhere. The color of the yellow soil seemed to cover everything. But he didn't see any enemies. He only saw a skinny woman trying to hide two girls behind her. Her eyes were wide open as she stared blankly at Huaishur. Her eyes were filled with fear. I'm sorry, he swallowed. I'm in the wrong place. He was about to turn around when he was kicked away by a teammate next to him. Then, he heard the roar of an automatic rifle, a series of loud noises, and a faint scream. There was also the sound of blood spurting out. He didn't even have time to turn around. Someone seemed to be shouting something in the distance. Something flew through the air, followed by another loud noise. In the end, there was no sound. There was dead silence. There was only a sharp buzzing sound in his ears. An RPG came out of nowhere and blew up everything into ruins. Huaishur subconsciously lay on the ground and crawled forward. Someone pulled him up and shouted something into his ear, but he couldn't hear clearly. He just followed the instructions of the captains and randomly pulled the trigger. He didn't even react when the magazine was empty. Then, he saw corpses, women, children, old people, and children. Some were tall, some were short, some were fat, some were thin. Some were whole, some were broken. The whole process was so fast that he didn't even react. He didn't even find where the enemy the instructor was talking about. The battle seemed to be over. Then, he was dragged to the square by angry teammates and punched and kicked. In the intense dizziness and trance, the instructor came forward. The middle-aged man with a mustache looked down at him for a long time, then waved behind him. Someone dragged two struggling enemies forward. Then, the instructor helped Huaishur up from the ground and gently patted the dust off him. The instructor put his gun in his hand and pointed at the screaming children on the ground and said something. Huaishur didn't hear clearly. He looked around blankly and saw the cold faces of his teammate. They saw a mess of corpses being dragged to the square and piled up into a mountain. The blood gathered in one place and formed a river. He still couldn't hear what the instructor said clearly, so his teammates slowly raised their guns and pointed them at him. He was stunned. The instructor finally spoke to him again. This time, Huaishur finally heard him clearly. He said, "Shoot." Huaishur subconsciously pulled the trigger at the enemy. Once, twice, thrice, 4 times, soon, the magazine was empty, and the two enemies on the ground turned into a pile of rotten meat. They no longer moved, and only blood bubbles continued to emerge from the bullet wounds, turning the dim yellow ground into a pitch-black color. At the very last moment, Huaishur finally saw her own face on top of the corpse. From the lifeless eyes of the two little girls. Huaishur opened his eyes in the room. Huaishur began to convulse violently. Huaishur roared something at the crow, and then Huaishur began to vomit. He bent down, lay on the ground, and vomited until tears were about to flow out. The first thing he felt was fear, then pain, followed by regret, and in the end, only anger and disgust were left, deep anger and disgust at himself. He actually shot. To two little girls who didn't have any ability to resist, damn it. He covered his face tiredly and couldn't help but want to cry, damn it, even when he burned the red gloves to death. He didn't feel the slightest bit of emotion. But in this record of nothingness, he felt such a deep fear of death and an incomparably deep resistance to the act of killing. There were no enemies at all, only old people who lost their sons in the war, women who lost their husbands, and children who lost their fathers. It was just a meaningless massacre. He actually shot. He clearly knew that it was just a record, and even if he was killed, there wouldn't be any problems, but he actually shot at two children who couldn't be considered enemies at all. Because of fear, confusion, or weakness. What did the red gloves do in the past? And what did he do? It seems that I was too eager for instant success, and the choice of the actual combat course was not appropriate. Crow looked at him pitifully. This is my fault, not yours. Rest for tonight, I'll adjust it tomorrow. No, just give me a few minutes. Huaishe interrupted her. A few minutes will be enough. Silence came. Soon, he finally calmed down, got up, and went to the bathroom, wiped the snot and saliva off his face, and returned to the hall. He said calmly, "Again? Are you sure?" Crow asked suspiciously. "Again." Huaishe repeated, "Again." After a long time, Crow seemed to understand something and laughed. She said, "Okay." Things seemed to be branching out, and darkness came. Huaishe opened her eyes. She could smell the dust in the air, and there was a scorching wind blowing in from the window. The instructor issued an order from the front passenger seat. "Kill all of them, don't leave a single one alive." Huaishe nodded and said, "Okay." Then he raised the muzzle, aimed at the driver's seat, and pulled the trigger. In the roar, the muzzle spewed out sparks. The driver was dead, and a ball of paste stuck to the broken window. The car suddenly twisted and rolled. Huaishe felt the wind blow beside him, and in the violent rolling, it seemed that a group of people had pounced on him. Soon, he was pinned to the ground by his teammates. The door of the back compartment opened. The instructor walked in with a blank expression and looked down at him. "Failed," he said and pulled the trigger. Bang! Huaishe's head exploded. He opened his eyes, panting violently and sweating profusely. Soon, he picked up the warm water on the table and drank it in one gulp. "Again." "Okay." Crow nodded, and darkness came again. "Kill all of them, don't leave a single one alive." When he heard the instructor's voice, he suddenly smiled. He pulled out a dagger from his boot and lightly slit the neck of his teammate on the right. Blood spurted out from the broken neck and dyed the dust in the air red. Time seemed to have frozen. At that moment, Huaishe pulled out his gun and fired repeatedly. He aimed at his teammates on the front, back, left, and right, and pulled the trigger again and again. Balls of brain matter exploded one after another. But soon, he was killed again. "You need to pay attention to some strategy," Crow said. "In theory, it's possible for you to kill them all without any injuries, but I need to remind you that what you read is the Red Glove's record. That is to say, what happened and what everyone did was based on his subjective judgment. Do you understand?" "Not really." "It's okay, you'll understand soon." Crow retracted his gaze. "Again?" "Okay." Huaishe opened his eyes again. In the car, under the instructor's order, he twisted his body slightly, slowly moved his neck, and checked the equipment on his body. A military knife, a pistol, an automatic rifle, a bulletproof vest, a walkie-talkie, and a few magazines inserted into the rapid reaction vest. And an iron pomegranate. Weighing the heavy object in his hand, Huaishe met the eyes of his teammates and smiled. His little finger quietly pulled out the ring. He softly counted down. 3, 2, 1. At that moment, he flew out and crashed into the door of the rear compartment. He fell out of the speeding car in a sorry state and rolled on the ground. The thorns and shrubs on the side of the road pierced his body, and his hands were in great pain. But soon, he heard a roar behind him. The speeding transport car suddenly shook and jumped up a few centimeters from the ground. Then, the iron box expanded as if it was blown up, and blood-red fire spewed out from the broken crack. Soon, it twisted and deformed in the fire and stopped rolling. Huaishe got up from the ground and panted violently under the scorching sun. But soon, he saw that the twisted iron door in the burning wreckage suddenly made a sharp sound. It was kicked open by a foot. In the passenger seat, the instructor with a cold expression slowly walked out and coldly looked at Huaishe's stunned expression. He should have looked like an ordinary person, and there were no signs of source form or sacred mark on his body. but he survived the violent explosion without losing a single hair. What happened, what everyone did, is the subjective judgment of the red gloves. That's what you mean, right? Huaisher couldn't help but laugh, mocking the red gloves guy. How much trauma do you have against your instructor? Otherwise, how could the instructor, who was obviously just an ordinary person, be unharmed in the explosion of the grenade? Did this guy think that his instructor was some kind of indestructible Iron King Kong? I really didn't expect that. 7794. The instructor looked at him indifferently and slowly twisted his neck. His fingers gently tapped the handle of the whip tied to his waist, making a sound that made Huaisher's body suddenly tense. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of fingers tapping on the whip was a sign of torture and punishment. Once torture, twice serious injuries, and then there would be no third time. Huaisher didn't know how many times he had seen his companions being whipped to death on the field. He actually felt the remaining despair and fear of the red gloves, and his will to resist quickly began to collapse. The instructor walked forward and looked down at his opponent, whose legs were trembling. He reached out and pressed his head. Twist. Crack. Huaisher's neck was broken. Bang. Huaisher opened his eyes angrily and slammed his fist on the table. Coward! He didn't know if he was scolding the red gloves or himself. After all, in the countless memories of training, he had deeply understood the coldness and cruelty of the instructor. It seems that you have understood the limitations of being a subjective recorder, right? Crow smiled strangely. Those who can't pull their perspective out of their own fear and confusion can't record everything as an absolute spectator. But this is the beauty of recording experience. It gives you the possibility to surpass the person being recorded. How do I do it? Huaisher asked. It's very simple, Crow said. Just destroy everything. No matter what happens, no matter what is stopping you, you just have to use your own way to get rid of them all. No matter how difficult the arcade is, there is always the possibility of being destroyed. One coin to clear the game is just the basics of the basics. On the contrary, speed and no injuries are what you should pursue. She paused and smiled slyly. How about it? If you feel that it's difficult, do you want to cheat? As long as it is recorded in the Book of Destiny, even if you want to modify yourself to be as omnipotent as a god, it will be easy. Forget it. Huaisher rested for a while and felt that his energy had almost recovered. He rubbed his aching forehead and was ready to start, but Crow handed him a cigarette. Since you have such a backbone, I'll give you a free blue bottle. Chapter 48. Huaisher froze for a moment and sniffed the handmade cigarette. It didn't even have a butt, but there seemed to be some kind of spice inside, which made him feel refreshed. Metal strengthens the body, incense nourishes the soul, Crow calmly said. You'll get used to it in the future, but be careful not to use it for no reason. It'll be very troublesome if you get addicted. Apart from a very small number of Millennium incense, most incense stimulates the effect of origin substances, just like the upgraded version of Red Bull and cigarettes. If you abuse it, it's easy to become an idiot. Huaisher nodded and didn't say anything else. After a moment, he looked at the origin substance on his fingertips that had dissipated and twisted his neck. Again. And so, darkness came. Soon, he opened his eyes again and sighed. Continue. Crow nodded. The long afternoon passed by in constant repetition. When he opened his eyes for the last time, the sky was already pitch black, and there was not a sound to be heard. Do you want to rest for a while? Crow asked. After all, you've reached your limit. One more. Huaisher finally understood the distress of Heavy Attic. He rubbed his eyebrows and yawned. I'm about to get the hang of it. Okay. Then, the last one? The last one. Huaisher nodded. And so, after a moment of absent-mindedness, he opened his eyes in the car and quietly listened to the orders from the front without saying a word. He even seized the last moment and closed his eyes to sleep for a while. "Call me when we're there." He patted the shoulder of his teammate next to him affectionately. Not long after, the car stopped outside the village. He was rudely kicked awake. Huaishur smiled unconcernedly, got up awkwardly, and set off behind his teammate. During the short period of hiding in the grass, he suddenly patted the shoulder of the person in front of him. His teammate turned around unhappily. Then, he saw him expressionlessly reach out with a dagger and stab it into his own throat. "Goodbye," Huaishur whispered softly. The color of blood soaked the dry earth and weed. On the barren land, he crawled, groping in the direction of his other teammate. His movements were quick. When he crawled, he used all four of his limbs. Just like a spider crawling through thorns. One by one, they enjoyed the thrill of beating up their teammates according to the information reported through the walkie-talkie. This kind of backstabbing experience was really enjoyable. Huaishur actually felt that he was starting to get used to it. This beautiful moment lasted until the gunshots of Team A were heard from the front. He sighed and heard the alarm from the walkie-talkie. Someone had already noticed that something was wrong. After all, 4 or 5 people had not responded for more than 5 minutes. It seemed like he couldn't stay here any longer. He shook his head, sat on the ground, and pulled out a few small pomegranate bolts. After weighing them in his hands, he threw them out with all his might. The sound of explosions could be heard from afar. Gunshots rang out, and the bushes beside him were like weeds in a rainstorm, constantly trembling from the bullets. Huaishur sighed, lifted his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face, and stood up from the corpses of his teammates. His uniform had been dyed scarlet by the blood of his allies. There was a big red patch on his butt. "Why do I look like a monkey with hemorrhoids?" Huaishur complained to himself. He picked up his rifle and walked in the direction of the gunshots, shouting loudly, "Don't shoot, we're on the same side." Then, he pulled the trigger at those stunned faces. He emptied one magazine without resistance, then another. He was shot in the shoulder, and it felt like a chisel had opened up a big hole. In the intense pain, he seemed to be unable to feel his left hand. "That's too much, old man. Why is your hand broken again?" Huaishur sighed helplessly. "I haven't learned how to change magazines with one hand." He threw away the automatic rifle in his hand, pulled out his pistol, and walked toward the village. 7794. "What are you doing?" An angry roar came from the walkie-talkie. "Of course I'm beating up my teammate. Friend, don't you know? I choose Black Lily, you choose Demigod. We can rebuild the Empire together." But there was no sound from the walkie-talkie. There was only gloomy silence until the instructor's cold voice sounded. "Mission change, clear 7794. They were focused on. Don't make a decision so quickly." Huaishur sighed. Before the channel was cut off, he raised the walkie-talkie and said tentatively, "I think I can still be saved." Bang! Huaishur tilted his head subconsciously and saw the walkie-talkie in his hand explode into a pile of trash in the air. A sniper's bullet. Under the strong reminder of the premonition of death, he crawled and quickly crawled into the tangled alleys of the village. He heard footsteps coming from all directions. He counted silently in his heart. In the original car, 7 on the left were Team B, 6 on the right were Team A, and including himself there were 13 people. And now, under the backstab of the traitor, 6 of the 7 Team B were dead. They were completely wiped out. Logically speaking, after Side B of the tape was played, Side A would be played. But Side A had not been played yet, and Huaishur felt that he would be played by Side A. Fortunately, he was not far away. He gestured in the direction, raised his pistol, and pointed at the daredevil in front of him. After falling to the ground, he casually fired 2 more shots. He took out the magazine and looked at it. There were 6 bullets left, 1 for each person. No way, he was not a sharpshooter. In this kind of chaotic battle, it would be lucky if he could hit one person with 6 shots. Maybe he could try shooting randomly with 5 shots. If these 5 shots were not enough to kill the 6 people on the opposite side, 1 shot was enough to kill 2 people. Then the remaining shot would be enough to give him a quick death. An unyielding death without suffering any humiliation. That sounded too romantic. The footsteps in the distance gradually faded. He took 2 steps and jumped over the wall out of the alleyway. After experiencing so many reincarnations of death, he had grasped some of the rules. Compared to the malicious level design of today's VR games, this kind of setting that could reduce the difficulty as long as there was a backboard was too benevolent. Then, in the courtyard behind the wall, he saw the pair of frightened eyes again. The stooped woman was still looking at the sky. Her eyes were dull. She tried in vain to hide the 2 skinny children behind her. But they were now dead, lying on the ground with bullet holes and blood on their bodies. Dust fell from the wind and covered the empty eyes. "Why is it you guys again?" Huaisher was stunned for a moment. He scratched his head and wanted to say something, but he did not know what to say. He knew that this was a record and these were all fake NPCs, but he still felt an indescribable sense of shame. This was not a game. "I'm sorry." Huaisher lowered his head and did not dare to look at the dust-covered eyes. He said, "I'm going out now." Huaisher slammed the door open and rushed into the road. He stabbed the barrel of his gun into the eye of an opponent. Go to hell, bang! A ball of blood burst out from the back of the person's head. He did not have time to look around. He ran for his life and staggered as he tried to get as far away from the courtyard as possible. But he could not forget that pair of eyes. When he began to treat all of this as a game, the countless deaths in the records woke him up from his dream. This was not a game. This was a record, a history of the past. History that once happened in a corner of this world. Insignificant massacres and insignificant death. They were all dead. Those eyes that had lost their luster were gradually covered by dust, buried, forgotten, and not even qualified to be remembered by people. Huaisher staggered and ran, wearily moving forward in the cracks. After kicking open a door, he finally arrived at his destination. In the room, the old man curled up in the corner seemed to be frightened and subconsciously hugged the thing in his arms tightly. "Let go." Huaisher leaned against the door frame, panting, and raised the pistol. "Give that to me." That person said something, hesitated for a moment, and then let go of his hand. Huaisher suppressed him and forced him to the ground. "Thank you." Huaisher panted, picked up the thing, staggered back 2 steps, and turned to leave. But after taking 2 steps, he could not help but turn back and shout behind him. "Don't worry, I will save you." No one responded. The people in this village were probably already dead. He could not save a single person. Damn it, Huaisher raised his arm and rubbed the corner of his eyes. He cursed in a low voice. "Damn it!" Then, he heard the roar of the door in the courtyard breaking. The sound of automatic rifles sounded like a storm, plowing through every inch of space. Huaisher curled up behind the stone mill and heard the sound of gravel flying above his head. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down in the smell of smoke. Then, Huaisher got up, picked up the RPG on his shoulder, and tried to show his teammates his brightest smile. "Hey, how are you guys?" Then, he pulled the trigger. Justice reigns from above. Boom! In the violent shock and impact, fire and smoke rose into the sky. The boiling blood mist filled the air and danced with the dust. Finally, it turned into fine rain and fell on the wall and the ground. And Huaisher's body. Silence reigned. Huaisher threw down the launcher in his hand, crossed the messy courtyard and streets, and walked to the center of the village. He walked to the man waiting there. The instructor seemed to be surprised by this result. He stood there with his hands behind his back for a moment. Soon, he raised his hand, took off the sunglasses on his face, and threw them on the ground. "Although they are all semi-finished products, they were all wiped out here. I didn't expect you to have guts." 7794. The pair of gray eyes stared coldly at Huai Shi's face. Then, he hooked his finger at the teenager. It seems that I need to teach you another lesson. Same to you. Huai Shi twisted his neck, threw away the holster, and the quick reaction vest that hindered him. He pulled out a military knife with one hand and put on a posture completely different from the opponent. Unlike the fighting techniques of the Roman military, it was a classic posture from Dongxia. It was the kind of beginner style that even the instructor almost didn't recognize. Come. Huai Shi grinned. Watch me beat you up with military boxing. Very good. The instructor seemed to understand something. His face gradually turned pale. The joints of his body rubbed together, and he said in a low voice, "Very good, 7794. I promise, before you die, you will experience what hell is." Chapter 49. In that instant, the sound of something shattering could be heard. Immediately afterwards, the wind howled. As he swung his fist, his right arm suddenly swelled. The pulsing muscles seemed to expand as if they were inflated. In the blink of an eye, countless knotted muscles seemed to have enlarged his arm by several times, revealing an almost deformed and sinister appearance. As Huai Shi dodged, the fist slammed into the ground. The entire plaza suddenly shook. It was as if it had been struck by a tank's main cannon. Was this a change brought about by the red gloves' past fear in the records, or was it something else? Huai Shi had no interest in finding out. He had died to the instructor's form more than once or twice. Bullets, guns, and explosives had no effect at all. It was like a nightmare in a nightmare. In the red gloves' memories, this instructor who had cruelly forged him into a weapon was a symbol of invincibility. His strength had been artificially magnified, like a monster. If it weren't for the fact that the red glove was incomparably certain that this instructor was just a normal person, Huai Shi guessed that the instructor's transformation right now was probably a transformation, growing bat wings and goat horns, casually casting a forbidden spell to destroy the heavens and earth. Fortunately, this degree of transformation wasn't too exaggerated for Huai Shi. He reached out and touched the blood on the ground. Confining hand. This was the first time he had tried this technique, he had just mastered in the record. As the origin substance flames rose from his fingertips, the blood began to stir as if it was boiling. A gray aura constantly rose from within. Who knew how many corpses and blood rose into the air like a thick fog, enveloping the entire plaza? Even though he didn't know why his soul had been named Confining Hand by the Silver Ocean, Huai Shi was very clear about its nature. It was a relatively rare transformation type among the various major categories, and it spanned across the two major categories, spirit and matter. And its range was origin substance and iron. In other words, he could build a bridge between the origin substance, which represented the soul's foundation, and the matter substance, which existed in the widest amount of iron, allowing the two to transform at will. It could be said to have a wide range of uses. That formless axe was the weapon that Huai Shi had created when he had placed all the uneasiness and killing intent he had accumulated over the past 7 years into the origin substance. And now, Huai Shi was using the sealing hand as a foundation to once again attempt to convert the origin substance in the outside world. As a result, countless pieces of rusty iron sand that were hard to distinguish with the naked eye rose from the blood. That was the essence of destruction. The ashes condensed by death. Accompanied by the dry wind and dust, they were deposited in the pungent smell of blood and smoke, quickly rising and spreading in the blink of an eye. Alms all despair and pain equally to everything. In that instant, a hoarse roar and angry roar came from within the dark fog. The wind howled and expanded, but it couldn't blow away the fog that was between origin substance and matter. A savage shadow charged at Huai Shi and punched out. Huai Shi dodged to the side and swung the dagger in his right hand horizontally, leaving a terrible wound on the huge deformed arm. Then, the dagger turned around and stabbed towards the instructor's neck. Bang! The dagger sank into his raised arm and collided with the bone. The sound was like steel colliding with steel. He felt the heavy breathing of a vicious beast erupt from the instructor's chest. The panting caused by such a violent power caused him to suck in large mouthfuls of the ashes in the air into his body. Under the stimulation of pain and despair, his anger became even more frenzied. Like a wild beast, Huaishur gripped the military knife tightly and stared at the instructor's face through the deformed arm. "How is it? How does it feel to be in despair that you personally created?" His smile was mocking. "I'm already used to it. What about you?" Bang! The huge arm swept past and actually let out a low rumble that broke through the air. The wind almost blew Huaishur 3 steps away. But then, Huaishur once again pounced on the instructor that he originally couldn't defeat. His smile was savage. He felt as if he was drunk. It was as if he was in a deep trance at the same time incomparably sober. Then, he felt a fanaticism. It was a kind of indescribable freedom. It was as if he was welcoming a release after extreme anger. When he breathed, the ashes in the air were sucked into his lungs. He inhaled the pain of the dead and became one with their despair. It was as if he had combined with countless deaths. He went from being the recorder and the recorded to being one of the records. He could feel the pain brought by the countless deaths at the same time and was also immersed in the despair of dying in a massacre. It was as if the souls of those people were standing here side by side with him. Then, the nothingness of death turned into a flame that boiled in his chest. After mixing with his anger, his unwillingness, and his will, it turned into an inexplicable impulse that erupted from the inside out and engulfed him. It urged him to face his opponent, to deliver punishment, and to bring about true death. Then, under the tight grip of the hand of confinement, the gray flame rose from the blade. It was a color that was far grayer and paler than the ashes of the calamity. It was a pure thing that was refined, extracted, and sublimated from countless despair and pain. It was a pure poison. It was a poison extracted from the records of self-death. It was a death that was condensed from the extremely condensed ashes of the calamity. Although it was not harmful to the physical body, once contaminated, it would undoubtedly bring the pain of death to the spirit of the victim, just like Huaishur had experienced countless times. At that moment, the words in the Book of Destiny quietly changed. It was not only the level of army boxing that was rapidly increasing, but a new branch quietly appeared under the sole introduction of Confinement Hand. It was a sole application that was recognized by the Book of Destiny. Heart poison. Yes, that's it. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. Crow stared at the young man immersed in madness in the record, and seemed to laugh happily. Represent death and take revenge on the beasts in the dark canyon. This is your destiny, Huaishur, the last guardian of the kingdom of heaven. At that moment, Huaishur's dagger slashed down. The deformed instructor roared in pain. His huge arm smashed down as if it had broken Huaishur's left arm that he could not feel. He did not waver at all. He still walked forward step by step, almost forgetting himself. He looked at the distorted face closely. His pitch-black eyes were filled with pure darkness. Then, the military knife slashed down again. Bang! It was a light military knife, but at this moment, under the control of the confinement hand, it made a heavy sound as if it was a heavy axe. An incredible weight emerged from it. With Huaishur's swing, the enemy's tendons were cut off again and again, and the enemy's flesh and blood were torn apart. The sound of bones breaking was like firewood being smashed by a huge axe. The instructor roared, clenched his fist, and opened his huge fingers to grab at Sui Xiong's face. But in the next moment, as the military knife slashed down, the iron-colored palm was cut off from the index finger and the ring finger. It was cut in half. The blade was deeply wedged into his wrist. In the intense pain, he saw Huaishur take a deep breath. Then, He roared and moved forward. Thunder burst forth. Following the sudden shattering of the military knife, origin flame surged out from within and transformed into the outline of a sharp blade. It moved forward inch by inch like a hot knife through butter, easily splitting the entire arm into two equal halves from the middle. Then, the burning dagger was raised again and slashed down. The deformed arm fell from the instructor's shoulder to the ground. Blood spurted out from the crack and fell on the square that had been spilled countless times. Together with those pained old men, despairing women, and ignorant children, their blood gathered in one place, turning into the same dim color on the desolate land. The instructor pushed him away with all his strength, but he could not stabilize his body. He staggered back and fell to the ground. But Huaishe moved forward, panting. He staggered over one corpse after another, walked in front of pairs of lifeless eyes, and left the red outline in their lost spirit. "Thanks to you, I've finally understood one thing," he murmured softly, suddenly raised his foot, and stepped on the instructor's chest. He pressed him to the ground again, and let him struggle in vain. Finally, he raised the dagger and aimed it at the instructor's neck from afar. "The reason why I chose to become a sublimator," as if saying goodbye, Huaishe solemnly stared at the distorted face and said to him word by word, "You're right," "is to chop off the head of a bastard like you." In that instant, as the blade slashed down, a deep crack was left in the ground. Blood gushed out from the neck of the headless corpse. It flowed through the crack and poured into the dried-up wasteland. It brought rare moisture to this dead land, leaving behind a glimmer of hope that it could wait for the flowers to bloom in the coming year. Then, Huaishe saw the whole world shake. Everything shattered. He sank into the darkness. Soon, he woke up from the chair. He only felt that he was sweating profusely. It was as if he was about to collapse. It was extremely uncomfortable. But for some reason, his heart felt calm and satisfied. It was as if he had just received his reward from the hypocritical revenge just now. "Congratulations on breaking through." Crow stood on the table and looked at him. "Did you get anything, Huaishe?" Huaishe was silent. He didn't know how to answer. In the end, he didn't do anything. It wasn't a rescue, nor was it a revenge. Perhaps as early as 10 years ago, everything had already ended. What he did was that he was not happy with the original plot, so he tore up the original work and wrote a doujinshi of his own. What did he get? After pondering for a moment, he chuckled softly. A beautiful dream, at least there's a beginning and an end. As he said that, he supported himself on the table and slowly got up. When he saw the dagger that he originally put on the table, he couldn't help but pick it up, casually played with it twice in his hand, and then threw it back on the table. As for the rest, just treat it as a consolation egg. After that, he didn't look at anything else and turned to go upstairs. After a whole day, he felt that he was dizzy and his vision was turning black. He was about to die from exhaustion. In this world, there was nothing more beautiful than a complete sleep. If there was, then he would sleep twice. Go to bed early. He waved his hand and closed the bedroom door. Crow watched the young man's figure disappear up the stairs. He turned around and looked at the table. Under the dim light of the table lamp, the cheap dagger was faintly iron-colored. It was nailed to the cracked and peeling paint of the long table, drawing a slender shadow. And at the place where the tip of the dagger was nailed, there was a tragic scar. It was like an axe. "Good night, Huaishe. Sleep." Crow spread his wings and flew into the hazy night outside the window. He disappeared. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.